kick that dude on. There's a record. And then kick this dude on and record. All right. So let me wrap this bad boy up here. Get that. Turn that off. Go to my camera. All right. So I think I got it now. And all right, so we'll just roll into it. This is where I roll into it. So I'd already do a build up and bring in the show. All right, guys, finally we're here. And I've been talking about this for a while about bringing my buddy Adam on the podcast, who you guys know him from the build up before, and he's been in the VW scene for a long time. But he's been living, I think he's been living in Las Vegas almost longer than you've been in California. I think
20 years.
Bro.
20 years.
Bro. As of right now, you're an official Nevadan, dude.
Yeah,
so,
you are right.
So we want to welcome Adam to the podcast today, man. How are you, buddy?
I'm good. I'm doing great, man. Can't complain.
Yeah, I've been chasing this guy for quite a while, and he really he plays hard to get, and we finally got him on here. And you know, one of the things before I started the podcast, I'd go to Adam's place and we would sit around and talk stories about the back in the day and all that fun stuff. And those stories are what pushed me to do the podcast. Because when I hear these really cool stories about things about the history and all that stuff, and I thought, man, these are so cool. I wish there was other people here to hear them. So it was one of the other reasons that I decided to get in the podcast over talking with you and other people about stories and the history of the hobby. And so the first thing we're going to get into, like we always do, is what is your VW story?
Wow. I think I was about 15, and it was probably time to start looking at what kind of car you wanted to drive. And back in the day, it was, I think, 85. And it was either a Camaro. My dad was like, you want a Camaro? And I was like, no, I want a Volkswagen, because in the 80s, that was it. And so started looking for a VW and found actually an oval window, a red oval window. Didn't know anything about them at the time, and basically this was an oval window that somebody had put on a late model 69 Pan, and that was my first Volkswagen that I got home when I was probably 15 and a half, and just did nothing but worked on it all the time.
And part of the thing with what made you pick, because I mean you're in Southern California, but like you're going to high school at the time, and like what is the reason you go with the reason that you decide Volkswagen?
Growing up in Orange County, I mean, the VW scene was big, I mean, that was the thing. Everybody had Volkswagens, and basically that was the car to have. I mean, it was like, I mean, I was kind of at that age where it was like, oh, heck yeah, I want a VW. Every older guy around town or at our school had, fixed up street cars, cowlook bugs, and so in the 80s, that was it,
So you live in Orange County at the time?
I lived in Orange County. I lived in Anaheim, right down in the center there, and that's where I was born and raised, and basically that's where it all kind of stemmed from.
It's the hotbed of VW stuff, and so you get this Volkswagen, and I mean, I'm assuming like every kid in Southern California, you get the Volkswagen, Gene all those guys are all essentially locals.
Yep. Johnny Speed and Chrome,
right?
Was like the first place you could go down there and we'd check everything out and buy this or buy that, and then we kind of went small car specialties, and that grew and got big, and then of course once we got into the motor side of it and trying to make big performance stuff, I mean, we ended up at Bergs.
So how did you get into doing performance stuff? Like where does that come from?
I just always worked on. My dad always worked on cars. He was always working on something in the garage. Didn't matter if we had a Jeep, his truck. We always worked on stuff. Solvent tanks, welders. Didn't matter. Build motors. And so when I got the Volkswagen, it was like, oh, this is, I can start working on this thing. And when we first bought this thing, it was I think it had a 1300 in it with dual cadrones, and the guy actually told us the clutch is going out. And really, the clutch wasn't going out. The guy had put a 4-puck disc in it,
right? And
the clutch was so aggressive that the thing would like literally chirp the tires in every gear. Well, in turn, I don't even think I turned 16 yet, and I was like, man, the pulley keeps coming loose. I don't know why. Now the pulley's cracked on the front. Well, it had literally ripped the flywheel off the back of the crank.
Really?
And I think it did that before I ever was even 16, and already had the motor out, and and it was like, okay, go get the books and try and figure out how to do it, and you know, that's how it started.
And so your dad was a mechanical kind of guy.
My dad was very mechanical. My dad, you know, owned a construction company, but also back in the day when he was growing up, had a gas station and worked on cars, drag racer. So that's kind of, we were always working on stuff.
So do you get to know the people in the VW scene through the Volkswagens, or did you go to school with them, or?
I would definitely tell you through the Volkswagens, going to the different shops, and it probably wasn't till almost my senior year when we really kind of started building nicer cars. And then after, of course, once I got out of school, which was 87, I graduated, and that's when we started, you know, building our first race car.
So you build your first race car, like yours. It always starts out the same, right? Like your street racing, your stuff like that. When your car's a bucket, I remember you telling me a story about you taking your mom's station wagon and going over to Camelot.
Yeah, I used to take my mom's car. Me and my buddies, we'd all go to Camelot. I think on Sunday nights, and you had all the older guys, Bill Schwimmer and, you know, Bergs and whoever else was there, and it was like, oh, you know, these guys were probably in their 20s. Here we are, teenagers, and I'll never forget. I pulled up behind Bill Schwimmer at that time, had Pepto, which was a famous car that was in the magazines.
Yeah, the pink square back.
Yeah, pink square back, and I got like, he thought I got too close to it, my mom's car, and he got out and he came over and he kind of yelled and screamed at us, you know, and we were like, oh my God, this guy's going to kill us, you know, and we were just young kids at the time. And,
right.
And here, this guy had, you know, he was probably in his early 20s, mid 20s, and had a super, super high-end car back then, and that's kind of was the exposure, you know, so when you saw cars like that, and you started going to the races and everything else, you're like, okay, I want to build something like that.
Sure.
You know?
Yeah, it gets you fired up, and you and at this time you got the oval window at home on the 69 Pan, which is the
Yep, I had an oval window at home on the 69 Pan, had semi-fours, and it was actually IRS, but it was actually a great little car. And then I also had a 67 that I was kind of going through and doing restoring that car, and had just had it painted, had some interior done, had a little motor in that. So I kind of had two of them about when I graduated high school, and you know, that's kind of where it went.
So now when do you really start seriously building engines? Because like at this point, you're probably gonna your thing is like, I'm going into construction with my old man, and this is what I'm gonna do. But then you start going down the road of like drag racing is what reels you into building your own motors.
Yeah, the drag racing thing basically reeled me into doing that. I ended up graduating, and at the time, in Hot VW's the frameworks, which are still around. I'm personal friends with Danny Rhodes and his dad Steve that passed away here just recently. But I saw an ad, and it was basically for a pro stock car. They called it a pro sedan. And for me, growing up, going to all the Winter Nationals, World Finals, I was a huge NHRA pro stock guy. Still am to this day. I mean, if I hit the lotto tomorrow, that's what I'd have.
Yeah.
You know? And so when I saw this ad, I told my dad, I said, man, we need to buy one of these and build one of these pro stock cars. And so he kind of laughed at first, and I said, hey, I'll sell both my street cars, and let's put that money towards one of these cars. Will you help me out, you know? And he said, yeah, no problem. So we actually went over to Arizona, met with them, and at the time, it was a chassis was like $995 for the chassis, believe it or not.
That's for the chassis kit.
That's just the chassis
weld it together on your own.
Weld it together, but you go, oh man, I can afford that, you know? And then it was like, well, that was no struts, and that's no this, and that's no that. And at the time, I already had a Foltz tranny in my street car, and I already had like a 2-liter motor with IDAs, and so it was like, okay. And so we went over there and kind of met with those guys, and that was the beginning of the Wicked car that has been in the magazines and that we drag raced for years. And so we ordered a car. I sold off all my street cars, and basically that's what got me into the motor side of it, really, because I was working construction, and actually I went to Arizona State for a semester because my car was getting built over there. And as soon as my car was done, I was like, okay, I'm done. I'm pulling out of school, and came home. My mom about killed me, but came home and went to work for my dad doing construction, because I had done that all my life already. Or I would say in my teens, he'd take me to work on the weekends. And so, you know, at 18, 19 years old, I was working construction, living at home, making decent money.
Right, it's all going to the bank.
It's all going into VW parts.
You're like 2 more weeks and I got a crankshaft.
That's exactly right. 2 more weeks, and I mean, I go to Berg every week. Okay, I can afford this. Okay, can I get a set of rods? Okay, and that's how you did it. And that's how a lot of people did it.
Yeah.
And so that basically, once we got that car done and got it on the track, that's when I always did my own motors. So I mean, but that kind of got the ball rolling for just building motors for myself at the time.
Now, what made you? Because obviously, there's a point when like you're building your own motors. You got your little drag car out there. First time you take that car out there, what do you run the first time? Like the first time you're out there, and the first time, are you building the engines, or are you having shops do the motor work for you?
Never had a shop do them. I always did it myself. Learned the hard way. First time we ever took my street car to Famosa drag strip.
Famosa is in Bakersfield?
Bakersfield,
That's a haul.
Yeah, I mean, so we went up to Famosa. We're going to go to one of the bug-ins, and we went up there the day before for a test and tune. I had just put brand new Firestone slicks on it and all the stuff. I mean, back then it had IDAs, and it was like I think it was a 2110 or something, and it had some Lonnie Reed heads, and it had, we thought it had the bomb, and I had a Vertex Magneto, and so we went out there, and I'd never really even been down a drag strip.
You'd never drag race before?
Never drag race. So we done it on the street, but never been to an actual track. So I said, hey, we're going to go down to the shutoff area, and we're going to launch this car a couple times. And so we went down to the shutoff area and launched the car 2 or 3 times. And about the 3rd time we did it, the motor shut off, and we were like, what the heck? So we got back to the pits and realized that the Magneto had slid up. And we're like, oh, that's why they have those big aluminum clamps to hold these things in.
Right.
We didn't know. Well, no, what really had happened was the crank spacer came off, because at the time I didn't have a racer spacer. I just had, who knows, one from wherever. And at high RPM, it literally came off the crank, went through the cam gears, broke the camshaft in half, bent all the valves, and junked the thing, and I never even went down the track. So it was hilarious. We drove all the way home, tore the whole thing apart, called all my friends, they came over, and it just wasn't going to happen. So we ended up driving all the way back for the race on Sunday just to go spectate.
So you drove back to Orange County, tore the motor apart, like, I'm going to rebuild this real quick.
Absolutely.
And then, okay, this is a lost cause. We're not missing the show.
Yep.
So you go back over there.
Literally pulled it all apart. The only thing that kept us from rebuilding it was when it bent all the valves, it blew all the guides out of the heads. And so we couldn't fix that. So it was like, okay, we're not fixing it for tomorrow. So everybody loaded up in the truck and drove all the way back out and went and hung out at the races.
And so the next time you eventually get on the drag strip.
Yep. Next time I get on the drag strip, it literally was my pro stock car. It was.
Are you kidding?
Nope.
Like first time down the drag strip, you're in a pro stock car.
LA County Raceway.
Really?
So our car was done. It was in primer.
You're like, I hope it's fast. I think I know how to drive.
Oh, I think I know how to drive, and let's see, I mean, really, that was the first time I ever did a burnout in the water box. And so it was pretty crazy, because at that time, Bug Pack was actually building a car. Jimmy Larson built a car for Bill Duncan and Dick Nuss at the same time our car was done. And so when both those cars got done, we were actually going to these tracks and testing the same places. Well, when you look at old school stuff, and Duncan and Ness was a big name back in Modified Compact and HRA, and so it was like, okay, and here we are, just some kids.
You're going after the big boys.
Well,
right?
we're just some
like,
kids.
My dad's a drywall guy.
Pretty much.
Let's do this.
This is. It was like, okay, let's see what we can do, and that's how it just started from there. And we pretty much did all our motor stuff. I used to go to Roger Crawford's shop, Heads Up, back in Fullerton, and we used his dyno. Roger did my first set of heads. Actually, funny, I called Fumio to have Fumio do heads for me.
Yeah.
But at the time, Fumio only did VW cast heads. And for me, I would tell you I was kind of maybe a new generation back then, because of the Bergs and Duncan and Nuss and all these guys, they did Fumio style heads or VW cast heads and wedge ports and this, and I'm going, I don't want to use those. There's no way. We need to do a Superflow, or we need to do.
Right, you're going to the big boy stuff, the Potter,
stuff.
whatever.
Well, it was back then. It was Superflow.
Superflow,
right?
the big.
And
big
so,
thing.
I called Fumio and I kept telling him no. And he'd say nope, 4237. That's the biggest valves we put in it. Nope. And I go, no, this is a big motor. It's a 2300. This isn't an 1800. Back where these guys used to run. Nope. 4237. And so, I'm like, nah, I'm not going to do it. So I actually went to Raj, and Roger did a couple sets of Superflows for me, and basically we built the motors, and we'd rent his dyno at the time, and we would dyno at Roger's shop, and that's how it was forever, and
what was the scene like back then? I mean, was it, well, because, back in the day, I mean, today, the technology that we have available is like unbelievable. It's digital. I mean, dynos are really sophisticated, all this kind of stuff. And paint a picture for me of what the scene was like back then.
Back in the day, coming from, I don't want to say I came from the V8 world, but I did a lot of research in the V8 world, and I had
Hold on
friends.
a second. Are you that guy that you don't like today that comes to your shop, be like, hey, I got a question about this. I saw this, and what about this, and this?
Yeah.
You were that guy?
I wasn't that guy, but I would just pay attention, and so we'd go, whether I was at Rogers, and I saw how his dyno operated and how we did stuff, or I'd go, okay, well, Berg, he's I mean, those guys are the
Sure.
epitome of it all, and I go, man, they roll their stuff right out the back too, and how they dynoed their stuff. There was no such thing as computerized dynos for Volkswagen guys or anything. Well, the V8 world had that, had dyno rooms and had more sophistication that we did, and so I would tell you it was really archaic, but at the time it wasn't. The development was huge because I can tell you just an exhaust. It was like, well, let's try an 1 3/4 header. And it was like, oh man, that made 7 more horsepower. Well, maybe we need an 1 7/8. Oh man, that's better. Well,
Right.
now we need a 2-inch, and so it was just very expedited because nobody had built big motors like that. The only guy that really was way ahead of all of us was Dean Lowry. Dean Lowry,
Really?
he was ahead of everybody because he did all the ARPM stuff, all the big motors. So in the very beginning when Pro Stock happened, Dean had big motors. He did big motors, and whether it was the midget stuff that he learned it from, doing all that. And so he kind of had a jump start on all of us. So, but the development side of it was huge. I mean, it was just progressing super fast.
And you're right there, in the big dogs, right? Like, what's the big class back then that everybody's running?
Well, back then it was all bracket racing.
Yeah, because you jump past bracket racing.
Yep.
All these classes right to Pro Stock.
Right into heads up, pro sedan. Pro
I mean,
stock.
you're a little confident.
Well, I don't know. I mean, it was just where I wanted. To me, I'd never been a bracket racer, and I was like, Klingerman, Mike Smith, all these guys, they were the king of bracket racers, right? And we loved it. Standing them on the back bumper, and it was just great. But it was like, for me, it was all about heads up. It was all about, hey, let's see what you have and who has the fastest stuff, and that's where it was at for me.
Right.
And so that was the only place I wanted to be. So we jumped right into that mix, and Jack Sacchetti, Ron Loomis, you look at Mitch Evenson, R&R Machine. There's some guys that were very innovative. Duncan and Nuss, the Bergs. I mean, there was just, because it was a heads-up class. It was like you went home after every weekend and worked on your stuff and tried to find more power and tried to go test, and that's how it was.
Now, back in those days, I mean, they were already done using not the DeMello's probably was the crank back in the day, but I'm almost thinking like SBG crank, right? Like the roller bearing stuff,
Yeah, no,
and all that. But that stuff was probably already done for the drag racing scene by then.
we were done with those. It would be if you found an Okrasa 78 and you could offset grind it to 82, because we'd take 78 Okrasas, VW Journal, take them out and have them offset ground to 82. Or you might even find a bigger one and offset grind it. Or, you could use bug pack stuff. Of course, the epitome of all of them was, man, you go get a Berg.
Right.
I mean, it was like you go buy a Berg crank, and that was the holy grail.
And the reason why Berg was so good was obviously because the casting in Sweden, I don't know if it was the same foundry VW used or whatever, but it was one of these things where if you read Berg's book, he goes through this whole 1-page thing about casting cranks and cutaways and how the metallurgy looks and all this stuff.
It's all the grain structure, the forgings, the quality control. I mean, Scat made great cranks. We use those also. But Bergs were just by far. You could take a motor with a Berg crank, run it harder, higher, and the cases would just look that much better. Because you got to remember, we're still using at the time magnesium cases.
Yeah, S41s.
Yeah, that are designed for 60 horse, and we're trying to make at that time, 240, 250 horse. And so when you didn't have a quality bottom end, I mean, you were literally having to take the thing apart all the time and put bearings in it because everything's moving around.
And so at this time, so it's the hot ticket. It's what's going on. You're running a pro stock class. Where are you ranking, and who are you battling with? And are you in the top 5? Are you where are you ranking?
When we first started, we had all the pieces, but we couldn't get the puzzle all together.
Right.
And a big shout out to Mitch Evenson up at R&R Machine. One day he comes over and I'm like, man, the thing should run faster than what it is.
Like, I got all the best parts.
I got all the good stuff. We've dynoed it, and he let me borrow a magneto. My car we were in Firebird, Phoenix, and my car was running somewhere in the probably 1070s, 1080s at that time.
And that's freaking fast even then.
I mean, at that time, I think he was going 1030s, right?
So
and we knew that, like, man, we have all the good stuff, but there's just something missing. And we would dyno it, and it'd run good. And you kind of have these cheat sheets, and you go, man, it should run faster than what it's running. But he came over, and he says, you know what? Here, I'm going to let you borrow one of my magnetos. And this is before even MSD ignitions.
What are you running? A 009?
No, we had magnetos, but everybody would take their magneto to different people, whether it was Joe Hunt or Cirillo or these guys, and have these guys up their magnetos and beef
set them up with weights and
well,
whatever.
Weights and the charge. So I mean, basically how they worked. And so I was like, okay, and we literally pulled our mag out, put his mag in, retimed the motor, and went out, and I think the car went 1051 on the first pass. And he had went fast for the day at like 1038. So I remember him walking back over and goes, okay, you can give me that back now. You figured out your problem, And we laughed about it and became good friends. And it was like, okay, that's our problem, And so we went back, and, about that time is when all the MSD ignition stuff kind of came into the world, and with 2 steps and starting line control and stuff like that. So we got rid of the mags and put all the electronics in the cars. And
so what's the setup of the motor that you're running in Wick when you're running that car?
We first built that car, it was 8494. So bird crank, Carrillo rods to start, Superflow heads, flat tappet still. Back then it was K800 valve springs, Berg rockers, Smith Brothers push rods. We did use J&G clutches. So,
and you're running compression at what?
We'd probably try and get as much. 15 to 1 was kind of a minimum. It was like you try to get as much.
Are you on alcohol or
no? It's all race gas. It's race fuel. And the big thing with compression was, and we didn't do it at the time, was now, you have pistons built around all that stuff. So in my later engine building days, when I started doing some of the super street stuff for like Angie Vanderhorst, we built mini dome pistons and stuff like that. But back then, you'd put a big old cam in it, and then you go, man, I got to notch my pistons more. And so, you would lose compression when you put the bigger cam in it. So there was a happy medium for all that, and just trying to figure it all out.
And so you run this car. How long do you campaign that car for?
Campaign that car for 3 or 4 years.
And then do you start building? How do you transition to engine building? Like, you're spending so much time racing and you're obsessing. And then I'm sure you bought every special tool to do your own whatever you needed. You know what I mean?
What happened was we were going to Rogers using his dyno and doing all that, but there were some downfalls. Back in those days, these guys would, you couldn't really run the motors over 7, maybe 7,500. But these big motors, it was hard to control, and I just didn't understand that. So I did some homework. I got a hold of, my dad had a friend called named Steve Jennings that did road race cars. A lot of 4-cylinder,
high RPM
stuff.
Yeah.
And so I kind of went over and talked to him a little bit about his dyno and how it worked, and basically it was all water supply. A lot of these guys ran them off the flipping hose going into the brake or into a maybe a small jacuzzi.
Oh, you're saying the dyno couldn't handle the high RPM.
Yeah. And I just couldn't understand that, because I'd watched V8s run 9,000 RPM, no problem, but why can't we run our small motors like that? So at that point, I was like, you know what, I want to buy my own dyno. And so I kind of went to my dad and said, hey, I want to buy my own dyno. And he says, well, do the homework, figure out how much it's going to cost. And my dad was pretty good. Like, he would go, hey, I'll split it with you. You know, I'll split it with you, and whatever it costs, you got to come up with half. Whether it was a Fultz tranny, and I'd be like, okay, you know. So I called Stuska at the time, and I remember I bought the dyno for $6,800, and I told him, hey, I want to run this thing 10,000 RPM and be able to control it. No problem. Here, you need these giant water pumps. And so I was like, okay, that's the ticket. And so at the time, we had a construction shop, and so my dad gave me a little portion of it to kind of set up as the race side. And so I actually built a dyno room. Probably one of the first guys really that I know of that had a dyno room.
And the purpose for the dyno is to control the atmosphere, to try to control...
Yeah, you know, well, you just didn't roll it out the back of the shop, and everybody had it on just rollers.
This is too loud, we took it outside.
Exactly. So we actually built a dyno room and tried to do like what we saw the V8 world doing.
Right.
And, you know, I just did my own stuff, you know, and it kind of progressed from there. You know, hey, I went and bought a flow bench, and I got a little lathe and a little mill, and so we could do more stuff in-house. And I had a lot of help. I mean... From people, you know, Gary Berg was super good to me. You know, when I didn't know, I'd go ask him, and he'd help me out, you know, whether it was with wedge mates or whatever, you know. So I was very fortunate on that point, you know, and we just kind of, we started doing all of it in-house. But about early 90s, I think 93, 92, 93 is... I kind of thought, you know what? I think I want to sell this. I'm going to sell this car, and at that point I was like, I thought I'm going to build a V8 car, you know. Mm-hmm. And kind of economy crashed, construction went down, and I was kind of tired of construction, and I thought I'm going to sell this. I'm going to open an engine shop.
You're like, I really got to make some money.
Yeah. Okay. And a guy I went to school with, basically his. Cousin at the time was building a Baja Bug, a 5/1600 they call it, and he goes, hey, you know, my cousin needs a motor, would you be interested? And I said, yeah, you know. So they brought me all the parts, and I put it all together, and I said, you know, let me go check this off-road thing out, you know. And I came out to a snore race here in Vegas, the Snore 250, and when I rolled into there, like, race morning, I was like, oh my gosh. Because really in the drag race world, there really wasn't a lot.
You got a handful of guys that are like, there's 30 guys in the entire racing scene.
Exactly. You know, and out of those 30 guys, 25 of them do it themselves. Right? When I came out to my first off-road race, it was like, there's 300 Volkswagens running around here. And it was like, holy cow. Now all of a sudden you're seeing Fat Performance, Don Hats, Kenny Majors. These are all guys that do nothing but build off-road race motors.
And now you know why.
And I was like, okay, you know what? I think I'm going to open an engine shop. And so I ended up putting my car up for sale. It was in the back of Hot VWs. I listed it for $48,000, and people laughed at me. You're never going to get that. I said, well, you could never build one for that.
Right.
And lo and behold, I had one guy, Mr. Maciel was his name, out of Monterrey, Mexico, that called me up and said, hey, I'm interested in your car. And he says, but I'm in Monterrey, Mexico. He says, would you bring it down here? And I'm like, there's no way, dude. I said,
you're like, I want to get down there, you're going to take my
yeah,
car.
I'm not taking it across the border. You know, he goes, no, how about you bring it to McAllen, Texas. McAllen, Texas. And I said, well, you send me $10,000 deposit to show me you're serious, and I'll bring it down there, and basically, so you can see it. And he goes, well, I want to see it run. There's a track down here where you run at the track. And so I was like, okay, you know, we can do that. And so 2 days later, boom, he sends me the money. And I'm like, holy cow, this guy's serious. So at that point, I'm like, chance of a lifetime. Load all this stuff up in the trailer. Me and my dad and my best buddy, Derek, we jump in the truck, and we're going to go show this guy the car, Texas. You know? So we drive all the way down there, get to this McAllen, Texas track, and it's like a little podunk track. And, you know, these guys have never seen a car like this, right? This car has got every bell, whistle, you name it. So at the time, we're like, man, let's pull all the weight out of this car.
Let's show these
guys what's up, you know. So we pulled all the weight that we had out of the car. And then we had another wing, like another element that went on the rear wing, and we're like, and it was all polished, it looked pretty. I'm like, hey, just put that on there because we would need it. You know?
We're just a showboat right now.
Yep. So we went out, and these guys go, hey, the track official go, we've never seen you run, so you need to go up and make a half pass. You need to make a 3/4 pass, and then you can make a full pull. No problem. Went up, made a half pass, no problem, clicked it off. Come back, make a 3/4 pass.
Sandbagging at this time. Right?
Well, at this point, it's like we're just shutting it off, like they said. Made a 3/4 down the track, shut it off, and coasted, and it went like 10:01 at 111 miles an hour.
Oh, get out of here!
So we're like, oh, this car, it's gonna fly, So at that point, he's like, man, I'm happy. It's all good. No. We're gonna show you. We're gonna show you one more pass, because at this point, we're like, we want to lay it down. Big mistake.
You're like, it's my last time driving this, dude. I'm gonna send it.
Yes, you got it. And so at this point, it's dark. The track has terrible lighting, and we go out there, and I get it in high gear, and the thing is just not really steering in fourth gear, and it's so dark that you kind of can't tell. But by the time I realize it, it catches the guardrail right at the top end.
No way.
So when it catches the guardrail, of course, we crash the car and just
no way
tumble this thing. So
are you kidding me?
No, I'm not kidding.
Oh,
so
get
back,
out.
this is back, and I can just remember crashing, thinking to myself, he still owed me, I think $37,000, right? And all in my head, I'm going $37,000. Oh my God, $37,000,
Oh,
and the thing, like, it tears the back, the wheelie bars. I mean, it destroys the car, body wise, really. And we stop, or it finally stops, and I jump out of the car, and they all come down there. Man, you okay? And I'm like, yeah, I'm fine,
You're just pissed.
I'm just like shocked. I've never even spun this car out, and it's just destroyed. And so at that point, I'm like, okay, we load everything back up, and he's like, hey, let's go over. We're gonna go have some dinner. We'll go to Denny's, And so we're all sitting there, and he's looking at me, and he says, so what are you gonna do? And I said, I'm going home to rebuild my car and go racing, man. I mean, that's just, there's no ifs, ands, or buts. That's just how it is. And he's like, you build a car just like that, and I'll buy it. And so he goes, how long? How long do you think? I go, 2 weeks. Give me 2 weeks.
So you rolled the car.
Yeah. So I'm sure I had a concussion at the time. I'm laughing because my buddy Derek and my dad look at me like I am crazy. And so I said, it might take a little longer than 2 weeks, but, let me see. And he goes, you build it, and I'll buy it. And I said, okay. So we literally loaded our stuff up after dinner, and since there was 3 of us, and this is how we did it always, we just swapped. We just took turns.
Driving shifts.
And we stopped at Frameworks in Arizona on the way home, opened the trailer door, showed him like, hey, this is what the deal is. We got this thing sold, but we got to basically either put a new chassis in it or fix it or whatever we got to do. And so he said, no problem, get it back to me and we'll put it on the jig and see what's good or not. So we literally got home. 2 days later, I had a bare chassis, took it back to Frameworks Arizona, and they put it on the jig, and literally the chassis just needed a new front section. The back of it was perfect. If anybody has ever seen that car was one of the first cars that they did what's called they skin the body. It had no drip rails. It had just was, we went into the shop and kind of mounted the body back up and anchored it on the, did porta powers and pushed all the body back up, and he metal worked all the body back out. And at the time I made the front ends, which we still make, the Aero front end, we still have them today. And we got a new fiberglass front end. We literally cut the front fenders off and we put them on the back. So if you ever look at how my car was, it had kind of rear fenders that we modified to put on the back, and redid the wing and wheelie bars and hubs. And about 3.5 weeks later, we were painting that car. We asked him, how do you want it painted? We're going to repaint it for you. And he basically says, I want it painted like Jack Sacchetti's car, which was a small car specialties pro sedan, but I want it to say small car hot. And so he said,
small car hot.
So I said, okay, so we painted the whole thing up for him. And literally 3 weeks later, we were driving back to Texas, and we made some passes down the street in it just to make sure everything was good.
Right.
And we told him, hey, we're bringing it to you, but we're not making passes. This is, you get it, And he says, well, as long as it's everything you say it is, we'll buy it. And so when that car got sold, I had the money to basically open an engine shop. And at that point, it was like, okay, Dad, I'm not working construction no more. I'm going to go open an engine shop.
Were you still working out of his shop?
I was still working out of his shop. And so basically that was kind of
Did that turn into Wiks Racing Engines, the first one?
That was a springboard to put me into Wiks Racing Engines in Anaheim. You know, we had the dyno, built the dyno room there, another dyno room, flow benches, you know, all the stuff to basically do motors.
And now at this time, have you built a few off-road motors for guys, stuff like that, or no?
At this point, I've done, I did one for this Brian Logan, was his name, was my very first client. And then we just kind of got the shop going, and I had another client that I still do work for him today. Matter of fact, his sons now race. Kevin Davis was my second guy, and we took care of basically those two guys' stuff. And I spent about a year, actually one whole season with these guys, where I kind of babysat them, did everything I could. And after a season, I had basically blown through every bit of savings, every bit of money, every bit of everything, being young and dumb, and you know, river trips and snow skiing and just having a good time, you know, and going to the races for 3-4 days. It didn't matter. I had money in the bank. But
are you living at home at this time?
I'm still living at home at the time.
Yeah, so life's not real yet.
Exactly. And then after that year, I was like, man, I'm down to some, I need to make some money, you know. And they both happened to win championships. And back then it was called Lorana, which ran right down in Barstow in Lucerne Valley. And they both won championships, and probably within 2.5 weeks, I had 17 motors lined up in my shop. And that was the beginning of...
And the difference in technology that they were using, like, so you go from full tilt, 250 horsepower street, you know, drag cars, to like now you're thinking, man, this is cake, dude, like little 1600s. And then you're just taking the mentality of the high RPM drag motors and putting it into the off-road engines. I mean, is there a learning curve that you're having to figure out between off-road and drag racing that it takes a while to get to?
Oh yeah, huge learning curve, you know, I mean, as far as that goes, because the off-road side of it is way more torque-based. To say it doesn't need to make big RPM power, that's, you know, it really doesn't. It needs to make torque, mid-range, to pull the next gear, pull in the sand. And it took
pull
us a while.
35-inch, 32-inch tires.
Yeah, it took a while to figure that out, camshaft-wise, and a lot of these motors are spec that we do, like for those cars. So they're very restricted, restrictor plates under the carburetors. So there's a lot of cam technology that goes into them. There's a lot of stuff that, you know, I mean, you're always trying stuff to try and make them better. And, you know, definitely, we had motors out there that, you know, we were always trying stuff. And I was fortunate those two guys were front runners, which made us look good. And, you know, once you have the ball rolling, and you have motors coming through the shop, okay, we'll use this guy and we'll try this or we'll try that. Or guys would be like, hey, you got something new and exciting, and okay, we'll try it. And like I tell a lot of people, you know, 1 out of 10 works. You know? So you're going to have to at least race it one race if it doesn't work, because we're not going to tear it apart right now. Go out and race it and let's just see. But, and so that's kind of how the engine shop evolved, you know, and basically it started with the VWs, and it's just progressed for the last 27 years.
That's nuts. And so you're doing the off-road motors, and the big difference that you and I've had plenty of conversations about is like the average street guy comes and goes, can I get 350 horsepower daily drivable for $5,000? And that's typically the way the street guy walks into your place. I mean, typically, until someone's built a couple motors and then the attitude is kind of like we'll get into how my attitude is about motors, but when we're talking, like, for example, I'm busy producing the show too at the same time, but for example, like, you know, with the street guy versus the off-road guy, it's like we've got guys that run businesses and this is their hobby and pleasure, and they're willing to spend the money to buy the right parts, to just basically say, here it is, you do it the way you would do it because you're going to be the name on this motor. And there's some risk there, right? Because if you start donating motors, like all of a sudden that kills your reputation. That goes quick.
Absolutely, there's huge risk in all of it. But in the off-road world, it's super competitive. It is mostly guys that don't have the mechanical aptitude to do their own, and so they would basically come to a professional, whether it's us, Fat, or some of these other guys, to have stuff done. And they're coming because you have a reputation. Hey, your stuff has been winning. Hey, your stuff lasts. Whatever it is, and so you have to give them a quality product. And most of the time, I mean, they all want a quote, right? It's not just like, hey, here's an open checkbook.
No.
But they know that they're gonna go beat the living crap out of it for 200 to 1,000 miles, depending on what race they're going to, and it's got to last. So it really comes down to the quality of parts, how it's prepared, how it's put together, how it's tuned. There's just a lot to it.
And I've always kind of had the mentality of like, the first guy who helped me build an engine was Dino Bacalus. I think you know Dino, drag racer, right?
Yeah.
And we built a little a 1904 for me, and it was, and I was annoying to him because I didn't know anything about building engines. And I go to his house, like, well, I read Gene Berg's book, and I don't want to go more than 7.5 to 1 compression, and it's gonna be a 1904, 40 by 35. I ported the head. I did all this work. And then that motor just ran fantastic. It was like a 14.0 motor in full dress street car, like alloys, adapters, interior, stereo, everything. But it was because I sat there reading Berg's book, and like you'd turn the key and the car would idle, like it would start up, like it wasn't, all the detail stuff. And then when I wanted to build a big motor, that's when I connected with Jim Barbeau at DRP, Desert Racing Performance. Yeah. And my attitude was like, well, these guys build engines that you're supposed to stand on all day. So if I'm looking for like power and daily driver, like these are my guys to go to because they know the bottom end tricks that make it work. And then all the geometry on the math and geometry on the valves and the top end and all that stuff is it is what it is. And as long as that works for your application, the bottom end's pretty critical. Because I can't tell you, I had one motor that guy built a motor for me, and his recipe for horsepower was just like fly cut the crap out of the heads, stock crank, stock everything else, 120 cam in there, give it back to you, and then I get it, and it's bleeding oil from the bottom of the cooler. You know what I mean? Like that little angle there where you get those crack cases from. But then I move into when I'm starting to build the bus, right? And I've had all these Type 1s. And I have this conversation with a guy because I want to talk to you about Type 4s a little bit because I'm a big Type 4 fan, and my philosophy. I remember I was talking to a guy. I can't remember this guy's name, and he had a panel bus, and we had met at a car show for a few minutes, and we were talking on the Samba, and he's like, "Bro, I'm going Type 4. You should think about Type 4 because I was building the Bull Run bus." And he's like, Type 4 is 90% German parts, and you're starting with a 2-liter engine. And it's like you're gonna feel the torque. It's gonna be different because we start talking about torque and horsepower and all this kind of stuff. And then when and I went for a ride, and it was Jim's. I think it was a Class 2 car that had Type 4s in it. Yeah. But it was just this wicked looking motor, like Porsche shroud, all this stuff. And this is like early '90s, and I'm like, bro, I need one of these because it's pushing this race car. It's got 35-inch tires on it, and this freaking thing's hauling the mail. And I go Type 4. My first thing out of the gate was like, I remember it was funny because my philosophy behind an engine building is like, I want to drive this car and not worry about it. So I remember my first engine that I had built in the Bull Run bus was $8,500 turnkey from Jake Raby.
Oh yeah.
2270, had the carbon Kevlar shroud, the 911 setup, like all that stuff, and all my buddies are like, bro, you're crazy, dude. $8,500, dude. Bro, you're getting like the mentality somehow in the street scene seems to think like motor should be $2,000. You know what I mean? Like, and I don't know where it comes from because everybody just thinks like, oh, slap, bump the horsepower, fly cut the heads, and you got power. But it's like that motor that's in that bus, the heads have never been off that motor since 2001. That's when I got that motor, and that bus has been everywhere and back. And with the development of the motor, it's like equivalent to a 1641. Now, and the biggest thing for me is like what surprised everybody is torque. Yeah. Torque is what you feel. Yeah. Horsepower is what you hear and makes your teeth rattle.
Yeah, there you go.
You know what I mean? But when do you start? Because in the off-road scene where you're at now, you start with VW engines. You have to end up doing Type 4s.
Absolutely. We started with all the smaller classes, and at that time, all the Class 1 cars were running Type 4s. And
these are Class 1s.
Class 1.
So these are like
unlimited buggy, basically.
This is before the trucks are a big deal.
This is before the trucks are a big deal. This is back when Class 1s overhauled everything, and this is probably the mid 90s. The trucks were just kind of getting there. And we got hooked up with the guys over at Wilson Motorsports, and they had some Type 4s that literally Don Hatz at the time, who's an off-road builder that's, you know, just an awesome dude still around. He was going to retire, and so they kind of reached out to me and said, hey, would you be interested in doing some Type 4s? And I said, oh, absolutely. But I can remember first getting those motors in, and we had never really worked on Type 4s. It's like, man, where do we find these parts, you know? But it was the same stuff, you know, everything's made aftermarket.
Now, I'm going to ask you this question. So when you start digging into the Type 4, is it, I mean, obviously it's similar enough, but you got torque specs that are different. And there's a lot of secret, I don't want to say secret stuff, but like recipes for power and longevity. So you reach out to this guy that's retiring, you reach out to him and get some like, hey man, give me some insight on how to build these things.
So Don would tell us whatever, and I can remember talking to my good friend Mike Stapleton, who actually took care of their program, and he says, well, you know, what kind of sealer do you use for this, and what kind of sealer do you use for that? And I'm like, well, we just use this high temp whatever for this. And he goes, oh, well, Don has this tray with all these different sealers, and it depends what part it is, where it goes in the motor. He has a different sealer for everything. Well, you do enough air-cooled stuff, and you have that tray. Trust me, because they can leak out of every orifice there is.
No, bro.
Yeah.
My understanding from the streets, it's RTV on everything.
No.
That
Oh, heck
doesn't
no.
work.
Different grades of RT3. You know, I mean, it's like...
Like, you know it's sealed when it's red and oozing through the case house?
That just means it's oozing on the inside, too, you know? So, but we reached out to Don, and he helped us great. You know, I mean, he was like, no problem. And, you know, we plucked our way through there and learned it, and it was, you know, that was our first kind of, these Type 4s at the time, they were 2,800 cc's, so they're 80 strokes, monsters. 103 bore.
But you're getting counterweight welded cranks, right? These aren't new forged cranks. Are these new forged?
These are forged cranks from Scat made all the cranks at the time. You know, we would use Corilla rods or Bug Pack H-beams, JE pistons. We would use stock castings on the heads, and we'd look for, of course, you'd want your 914 2-liter head was the ideal head, but finding those heads was like pulling teeth, right? And so we did have those, and so we learned real quick that, okay, this is what we need to find and kind of have in our arsenal. And, you know, they were just basically an opposed big Type 1. But, just a big, know,
so what's your impression the first time you drive a Type 4?
Oh, unbelievable. You know,
you're like, man, I feel like a V8 in the back.
No, it's just, the torque curve on a Type 4 because of the cylinder head and just cubic inches. I don't care. A 2-liter Type 1 or a 2-liter Type 4, there's just a night and day difference. Now, don't get me wrong. A Type 4 does not want to rev.
No,
like they're a 6,000 RPM max. Even when you do all the bells and whistles, okay, you might run them 6,500, but you know, but they are just animals from 3 to 6,000. And
in your experience building, because this is not going to be the Type 4 show, guys, don't worry, but it could be. But in your experience, bottom end, back then in those days when you were building them, after a season, you're just trashing the Type 1 case and you can reuse the Type 4 case?
Oh, for sure. The Type 4 case is aluminum stock, so...
Bulletproof.
Bulletproof. I mean, let's face it, we would take Type 1s and put Type 4 main journal cranks in them, right? I mean, that was the big trick, still is. You know, Type 4 center main, Type 4 mains, to make the overlap of the crank and make everything stronger. So that was already stock with a Type 4. The cases were already aluminum with a Type 4. So the case was much stronger. You just didn't have the problems you had with magnesium cases. So, I mean, the biggest downfall for the Type 4 is the head stud spread, and where the spark plug location is in the combustion chamber. It basically has a weak part up in that head area and wants to lift the head. That's why Fat and all these guys would fifth stud them. We would fifth stud them. We'd put another stud right up there to clamp the head down, and we'd make copper head gaskets for them. We do.
But on those off-road cars, one of the recipes for power is once you get displacement, then it becomes compression. Is that right?
Oh yeah, but we didn't run anything over 11-to-1 would be a super high compression boat.
Type 4,
super high. You know.
And on the Type 1 race engines, the Type 1 off-road engines, are you running compression that high?
Oh, the small little 1600s, 13-to-1.
Really?
Yeah, we'd run them. 12.8 was pretty standard, still is to this day. 12.8 on the 1600s. The only thing that limits us from going more is we're not allowed to cut notches in the pistons.
Right.
So the valve with the cams that we run nowadays, the valves hit the pistons. So you could get them about, depending on the cam and lobe separation of where you install it, you can get them about 13-1 is about it. But if somebody over revs it, you're probably bending some valves. So
That's nuts.
yeah, the Type 4 is by hands down just a much beast of a motor.
And so talking a little bit about just specifically off-road wise, what killed the Type 4 in off-road racing?
Cars get bigger. Everything. Cars get bigger, and what happens with the evolution in the off-road side, and I've seen it all the way to present time, is shock absorbers get better, tires get better.
Now you can go faster.
You can go faster. Well, pretty soon we're driving these Type 4s just literally wide open all day long. Well, now that's the weak link. So first thing guys started putting is 6-cylinder Porsches in. Well, now the motor's got enough power, you'd break the car.
Yeah.
Once we get the car developed, now you're breaking the motor. And then it was a V6, Oddfire V6. Then we did Scat V4s for a while, and even the very first time we built LSs and put basically crate LS motors that were 400 horse in these cars, it was like, oh man, we'll never need anything more than that. Well, as the shock absorbers get better and the suspension gets better and everything gets better, pretty soon we're taking those motors and you're driving them wide open all day long. Well, the motor just won't make it, And so there's always a weak link, The cars have gotten bigger, everything gets heavier, and you just need more power to push it.
Yeah, that was the amazing thing to me. My first experience with, because I've never been into the off-road scene and all that kind of stuff. Other than the first bug I rode in was my buddy Rich Petrie's, and we're doing donuts in the parking lot of the pizza place because it's raining, and it's got skinny bias plies on the front, big old knobbies on the back. It's got the old bug eye kit on it. And, but other than just like ripping through dirt tracks and stuff like that, or dirt lots with an off-road car, I never really did anything like that. So my first experience with it is over at Jim's place at DRP.
Sure.
And he had he was running a race program for a guy that made the bedliners. And I can't remember the guy's name, but that guy had a Class 1 car and a Class 2 car. Sure. And Jim was built, and I remember seeing the motor, and he had this Porsche motor in the back of this Class 1 car. Yeah. And I think this might have been like this car was the hot ticket in 88.
Sure.
And now it's like 93, 95. These cars are sitting in the corner of the shop like that. He's like, yeah, that motor in there, bud's $30,000. Now $30,000 in 88 for a motor was a lot. That's like a $75,000 motor. Yes, you know what I mean?
Absolutely.
And it's like, and my experience with that was, I said, Jim, dude, take me for a ride in that car. And so he's like, all right, hop in, bud. So, the battery's like down low underneath, and we go take off across Oquendo over there, and the car stalls out. He's like, hey, bud, I don't know if you know Jim Barba, but he's a little bit hillbilly. He's my dog, man. Jim is my dog. Uh-huh. And he says, hey, bud, go back to the shop, get the Manx, let's jump this thing. So I go get the jumper cables, and I'm like, well, where's the battery? He's like, it's underneath. So it's underneath. I'm behind the back tire, like underneath connecting the jumper cables. He goes, I'm going to fire it up and get going. Well, I didn't know that means he was going to pelt me with like 1,000 rocks because that's off-road racing.
Sure,
it's like,
sure.
And Jim was a little bit crazy. And so, he just like sidestepped the clutch. I never got to ride in that car, but I got to see him jump it over by the railroad tracks and all that kind of stuff. But, I would see like crazy technology that was nowhere near the street scene.
No.
Big, huge brakes. All kinds of stuff. And we see how that progression evolves and eventually makes its way down. Like when I had Kevin with that sells the Mendiola chassis, which are now the Cool Ride chassis. I talked to him about that, and Mendiola was real tight with Fox. And Fox engineers designed the A-arm suspension that goes under the Beetle for the street. And I'm like, oh, well, that's kind of cheating.
Yeah.
But you know what I mean? Not really cheating, but it's like you have a company that does suspension geometry, and now you get to the point where there's barrier to entry is the cost. So that's what moves that level up. But the off-road scene in and of itself has pushed technology so far, and I think because I would say in the off-road scene, it's 10-1 motors built versus the street scene, at least 10-1 on engines being built. Even I'm talking against daily drivers and all that stuff, because the off-road guys build motors on the reg. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I would definitely tell you that. That's been our business for, 27, 28 years. Do we do street stuff? Absolutely, but it's probably 10-1.
But and you rebuilt the motor that's in my crew cab, yes. The carbon cab, I think it's 2600 in that bad boy, and I'm so used to a Type 4, like it's just expected. Now, I'm excited to get my split back because my split's got a Type 4 in it too. But a Type 4, a big Type 4 in a bug for a street driver is just a straight kick in the pants.
Oh, it's got to be.
Because it's a
Never
tire
happened.
roaster, especially with small, like if you got a tire total height that's like 28 inches and you're
Yeah.
just like, rah!
Yeah.
I mean, the thing gets so squirrely and it just like I said, it feels like a V8 in the back. So I'm super stoked to get that back. But I've always been such a fan of Type 4s, but they're two different ends of the spectrum, right? Like the Type 1 is, because, I got the chop car out here now, and I was thinking the other day, I thought, that car deserves to be like, clean it up like where it is, but I really should set it up where I could quarter mile that car if I wanted to. It's a 2300 in there, it's got the 48s. Wouldn't take much to set it up to where I could just, take it out and run it down the track a couple times. If I could get a 12-second pass out of it, I'd be stoked.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? But it's like the Type 1 has a different kind. Like Type 1 is like push it as far as you can and wind it out and do all that stuff. Totally different in the Type 4.
Absolutely.
It's
Type 4 is just I would tell you a touring car. Motor.
the 454.
There you go.
It's the tow rig for the race car.
There you go.
You know what I mean?
That's probably perfect analogy there.
Because when it comes down to it, there's the analogy or the saying, there's no replacement for displacement. And I could never figure out why people just never would do, because realistically, if a guy's trying to build a big motor on the cheap and you found a stock Type 4 with blown out heads, you buy a set of heads, you reuse everything else, most of the stuff's going to be decent. The crank will be decent, the rods will be decent, and you could probably get maybe 105 horse out of the thing and 90 pounds of torque, or 100, you know what I mean? Like,
a 2-liter probably makes more than that.
you know what I mean? I'm just trying to be conservative, but I can never figure out why that never took off with the street crowd. Like, why?
I think it's just it's not as accessible and easy to get all the pieces. The upright shrouds, and if you're going to put a 911 fan in it, I mean, that stuff's costs money.
That's $1,500, $2,000.
So when you start looking at that, and I look at it and go, a gasket kit alone, let's just say a VW Type 1 gasket kit's $12. A Type 4 kit is probably $50.
Yeah.
I mean, so it's like, there's just a big difference, I mean, main bearings are double or triple what a set of Type 1 bearings are. And so I think for the VW side of it, for the average dude, it's just kind of out of their wheelhouse, and it's too much money.
Yeah.
So for the pure enthusiast like yourself, yeah, I mean, Type 4, if I was going to build a driver street car, I'd probably put a 2700 cc Type 4 in it, and it'd be just, great.
That'd be something you can just park in the garage, drive it once a month, it fires up, and it's just torquey, and
drive
just
it wherever you want, and and go from there.
I mean, that's what we were looking at. We were looking at my square back when we came in here, and I'm negotiating with a dude. I offered this guy $500 for a Subaru to get the motor out of it, and he was asking 800 or 1,000, and I'm like, I didn't care. I didn't need, you've seen my yard here. I don't need another car.
Yeah, you got plenty of cars.
Yeah, so I told the guy, I said, I'll give you 500. He texted me today. He's like, all right, man, I'll take the 500. My only concern is the car doesn't run because the fuel pump's out. But as we're sitting here talking back and forth, I have several Pancake Type 4 core motors that are sitting in my brother's shop. I've got a 914 2-liter one, which I'm saving for my next Type 34 project, because what I want to do is do, a 914 stroke, the 914 heads, bore stroke, and build that to where it's like a nice, something I could get into, like you said, and drive it. My only reservation with doing the Subi swap in that is all the radiator, the plumbing, that stuff. Everything else, for the most part, is pretty turnkey. And the thing with the tech, and that's the thing you battle, it's the technology, it's the echo tech of what fits in a Volkswagen.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
I have the same thing going on with a fabricator here in town. Kevin Bunderson's building one of the monster Manx, and he's doing a full A-arm Manx. And he had originally got a Type 4 for it, and then he goes, I think I'm going to put an Ecotech in it. What do you think? I go, well, they're pretty bulletproof, this and that, but you have to put radiators, and you have to have all the electronics. And so he sent me over a nice Type 4, and we put it on the dyno, and we ran it, and I go, I got to be honest, this thing's a pretty good little motor. I probably just, for simplicity reasons, just if
done.
You're done.
Bolted
you
in and you're done.
carburetors, you could work on it anywhere and you're done. No radiators, no hoses, no wiring. And he's like, okay, sold. That's what we're doing.
So did he get like an old off-road takeout motor? Like, somebody Ecotech, and he's like,
he's a builder, an off-road guy, been doing it forever, and he got himself it's a nice motor, 2800. The only thing we're looking for is we're going to put the 911 fan kit on it.
I know a guy who makes those.
Yeah, so we're going to do that, and then but other than that, it's a nice little motor, and I go, man, I think it's simple. Right, when you start transplanting the Subi into that thing, you're
that's
like,
the
oh
thing.
my
It's
God.
like I already cut the holes underneath on the square back to do the grill, and I'm like, well, I do that, then I just got to run the lines and do this and do that, and that's a whole ordeal in and of itself. But it's like, yeah, but once it's running, it's like 170 horsepower. That's just this linear power curve with a built-in rev limiter, overhead cam, and just it's a different kind of power, so, and that's the thing. If I had it my way and I could just drop it off, pick it up, and it's done for a reasonable amount of cash, I'd be super stoked to do that. But it's almost like us as VW guys, we're real do-it-yourselfers. Like we all want to have some part of the job.
Sure.
You know what I mean? And it's kind of ridiculous because if you're smart, sit back, let the guy who knows what he's doing do it, and just enjoy it. Drive it around and be happy. But I think, I love street cars. For the street cars, I love Type 4s. If I'm trying to go fast, straight line, quarter mile, there's no questions. Type 1, 100%. I mean, it's 100%. In your opinion, what has been the biggest development in the Type 1 from when you started racing till now to make them more relevant and accessible and all that kind of stuff? What's been the biggest change?
Cylinder head development, airflow. That's cranks are cranks, rods are rods. That stuff, you could have a bird crank from 1980s and it's still a top line piece. But all the different cylinder head stuff, whether it's autocraft, component developments, all the stuff that CB does with CNC ported, 044s and just the valve train stuff, that has been the biggest development. What made these motors make more power, last longer. Period. I mean,
has that been like, is there, from an off-road standpoint, I mean, your name is on these motors. Does that make it like, is the biggest thing that could jeopardize your reputation crap parts that you're getting from supposedly reputable suppliers?
Absolutely. That's motor failure, right? It doesn't matter.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter what part is in there. If that thing finishes the race, it's good, right? That's what the owner thinks. It might be hurt or junk or worn out, but the quality of the stuff that comes out of a lot of these places nowadays is just everything has to be checked. I mean, we have more tools, mics, machinery to resurface, rebore, and redo stuff, and everything just 100% gets checked. We have to, because our name's on it, and we do a higher end version, I mean.
Well, it's what you do because when you set out to build a motor, whether it's a street car or race car,
we do it the same way.
The prep work is the same either way.
It doesn't matter. If you're building a 2-liter street motor or we're building you a full-blown race motor, we're bore gauging, we're file fitting, we're miking everything, we're pin fitting pistons and rods, we're setting cam timing, setting geometry. We are doing it the same way no matter what. That's just how we do it. That's why you come to Wiks Racing. Bottom line, we're not going to shortcut it because our name's there.
And percentage of parts that get touched on a build that come out of a box from a supplier, percentage of parts that you have to modify, touch, or alter.
85%.
85% of the parts.
85%. Even bearings. I mean, we go through and have to hand pick bearings. We'll get certain bearings and you put, let's just say, the camshaft in and camshaft won't even spin. You're like, what the heck? And grab another set of bearings and it's fine. They look visually fine, but there's definitely something wrong, and they're definitely not made right. So I'm going to tell you at least 85%,
So 85% of the parts and pieces you touch.
Oh, yeah.
Now, as things have evolved in the off-road scene, because I want to touch on a couple things here. One, you end up moving to Las Vegas, to my city.
Yeah.
Which you're welcome and thank you. It's because we get a good engine builder here because you need that. But what drives you to come out here to Vegas, and how does that come around? And what was it like leaving California?
So, born and raised in Orange County, basically in the off-road scene, building motors, doing that, and did lots of motors for people in Vegas, but Orange County, Arizona, all that, and basically met my wife through the racing. She raced 1,600 cars, and started doing her engines, and spent a lot of time up here, coming up and helping her, and we dated for I don't know 5-6 years probably. And I was at a point where it was like, man, she's not going to move here because she has a flooring company and does commercial flooring, a lot of casinos and conventions and all that. Yeah, and so my option is to move up here, and got to be honest, with the off-road, with the drag strip, with the lake, I was like, heck, why not? At this point, let's just do it. I'm gonna move up here. I'll move my shop up here. And at the time, I was in California and I had 3,000 square feet, and I think I had 5 guys working for me, and it was, we did a lot of sand car stuff. We did a little bit of everything, and it was like, I'm good. I'm gonna move up there. I'm gonna have one little helper, and I'm just gonna scale it back, and I'll be good, and so I ended up moving up here, and I ran 2 shops for a while. I had my shop in Orange County and my shop up here, but that got to be just too much, so I sold my shop in Orange County to George Jimenez, which I went to high school with, actually junior high. I've known him that long.
Really?
And I told him, hey, man, I'm leaving. You put your name on the door, and not all my clients are going to follow me up here. There's no doubt you'll have work. And it took me a while to convince him. And finally he said, okay. And so I sold him everything, my dyno and all the stuff down there, because by this time I had pretty much two of everything. And he's still up in business today, and we're actually competitors. We're very good friends, talk to him probably once a week. And I moved up here and kind of put a shop together right around the corner from your house here. I've kind of been in the southwest portion of Vegas for 20 years, and just slowly but surely
now, as you
made this my home.
As you came out, so I'm just asking this question: would you go back to California or stay here?
That's a tough one, There's certain things about Cali that I love.
Just the weather, bro. Just say it. Just
the
the weather.
The weather is nice.
It's great.
Before this COVID, it wasn't even, I would tell you, like I tell people, Vegas is a great place, easy to get in and out of. I can be at the airport in 15 minutes from my house, sitting at Southwest, fly anywhere in the country. Mm-hmm. The lake, the desert, the drags, the mountains. I love to fish. I go to Mammoth at least 2-3 times a year, going up to the Sierras and fishing. I can get there quicker than my buddies from Orange County.
Yeah.
So it's really pretty good place. Yeah, 3 weeks out of the year, it's super hot, and 3 weeks out of the year, it's windy and cold. But you get used to it, and I think at this point, I'm 51 years old, and I think, if I moved, where would I move to? Well, I could definitely tell you, I could probably live down in, Bonsall. My niece lives in Bonsall, and we spend time down in Del Mar and Solana Beach and all that, and we love it down there. But holy cow!
You're gonna trade your cost. You're gonna trade how you live here.
Yeah, and the traffic down there anymore. Every time I go down there, because I do go down there quite a bit, the traffic is just like, it never used to be like this, Yeah. And I laugh when people say Vegas has traffic. I'm like, this ain't traffic,
Right.
So I got to tell you, I probably wouldn't. I'm good where I'm at.
I think not to make this a commercial for Vegas, but I love my city so much just because there's an overabundance of convenience here. This town, no matter how big it gets, it's still 30 minutes from one side of town to the other, And like I said, there's a little bit of traffic, but I just love it's got the benefits of California by being it's car season all year long, and then here you and I can hop in our little side-by-side machine within a 2 or 3 block drive. We can find a patch of desert, and then for us here in Vegas. During the wintertime when it's cool like this, what we'll do is, I'm going to put my new clutch on my side-by-side. I'm going to hop on my side-by-side probably Saturday afternoon, take a ride out to the Pioneer Saloon over there and get myself some lunch or dinner and just take a cruise back. But it's you can't do that in California.
No, and that is true. Because I do that. We do that ourselves. And the other big thing is, for the off-road side of it, Oh, we're gonna go test. Okay, 15 minutes. I'm out testing in some of the best desert tracks that we have, right?
Unless you're my neighbor, and then you just like he just pulls.
Yeah,
he just pulls right out of the jumps the tracks, and then what?
Yeah, and I look at it and go, all my clients in Orange County, it's a 2.5 hour drive to Barstow to go test. And I go, you forget that how convenient it is, and we have a lot of friends that come into town. And it's like the best entertainment, the best food. Do we go hang out at the Strip? No, I never go down there. I couldn't tell you. You don't even know it's down there when you live here. But when you want to go down there and have
world class, whatever you want.
Whatever you want. And so it is a pretty good town, but you guys don't need to move here.
Yeah,
it's
you guys
it's crowded enough.
Stay back there. But I look at and the VW scene out here has been continually growing, because that was kind of one of our things back here was like, I mean, like even you, once you sold your car, have you had a street car since then?
I have not.
It's my mission on Let's Talk Dubs to get this deadbeat of VW, bro, because I'm like worn out with you not having a VW. You should have the fastest street car on the street, bro.
Yeah, well,
like
it might be in the works. I got some stuff brewing. So let's see.
But I mean, it would just be, there's so many. It's funny because there's so many VW people here in this town that VWs are like either their business, or they race them, or they do whatever. But these guys are all low key, and it's like it's funny because the scene here, we're talking to Kyoki who's with you, and he's like I don't care for the drama in the scene and all that stuff, and it's funny because you get that happens. It happens in any race scene where you're at.
Absolutely.
If you've got a fast car and then and now especially with like the internet, it used to be like whoever's coming out to the street races can talk crap. But you don't gotta go to the street race anymore. You just get an Instagram, talk some trash or whatever, and
social media does it.
Yeah,
you can do it right there.
But I love that this town's been progressively growing as a VW scene, and we have, especially with the advent of events and stuff that we're having out here, I think within a few more years with the Let's Talk Dubs events that we did out here, which everybody loved, it'll just continue to keep growing, and we'll just keep working on building up to where Vegas was. Because before, the two places that put on shows before had this big old falling out, this was becoming one of the biggest places to have a show because of the drag strip. The Holes used to do a drag strip out there.
Yep.
They would do the drags, and the tough part about the drags, like you said, it's like, you only got the small group of guys that are in it. And then when you get drama in that scene, and then maybe they don't like the promoter, or they don't like this, then it's like, okay, the 30 guys, 15 are coming. Well, 15 doesn't pay enough to make any purses. So here these guys are dragging stuff that they've got $50, $60, $70,000 in their drag car, and they're coming out here and they're not going to win any money, and it's just going to cost.
That's the hard thing.
Yeah, and so that's where, like, I think on the off-road side, there's been so much, and there's like this renewed growth in off-road recently. I mean, I've been seeing like the Class 11 cars have been going through the roof. I mean, it's
the Class 11 things really came back strong because believe it or not, they've just there's some money. They put up a couple big purses for like a four race deal. You could win $20,000, even though these guys probably have double that in their Class 11 car, but they go, man, I could go win $20,000. I'm building one, and it's cool, and I think the VW scene definitely is coming back because a lot of the guys we do motors for, they're in their 40s, maybe even 50s. They have some money now. They're kind of settled. Kids are grown, and they're like, you know what? I had this cool. I want to build a car like I used to have, And so that's what we see. We see, guys coming in and going, nope, I'm restoring this car. I finally found what I wanted, and I'm going to do it right. And yeah, it's going to be a project, but I'm willing to spend the money and do it really nice.
And you're seeing also a resurgence in restoring of like classic race cars now. Like isn't there a whole thing with like vintage race cars now?
There's a whole thing with vintage race cars, whether the off-road side of it's been huge because the Nora group has put on what's called the Mexican 1000, and it started out to be just kind of a rally to where it was all vintage cars. And so it's been going on probably at least 4, maybe 5 years. And so these guys are finding their cars that they ran in the 80s or 90s, and they are getting them back, restoring them pristine like they were. I mean, all from motors, everything.
Like nicer than they were back then.
Well, way nicer than they were. And then they go and do these rally races, and basically it's anywhere from 100 to maybe 250 miles a day. And at the end of each day, there's a big party and dinner and the whole 9 yards. And it's about a week-long race that happens down in the Baja Peninsula, and it usually goes from Ensenada all the way down to Cabo, and And it's just, I've never done it personally, but everybody's like, you got to do it. It's a great time, you know. It's just not the pressure of the big races.
Yeah.
And it's just a lot of fun. So, you know, a lot of guys are doing that, and even on the V8 side, guys are, you know, restoring, you know,
old Broncos.
Well,
and
Broncos,
whatever.
and even the drag race side. I think they had a thing at the Winter Nationals this year where they brought some old pro stock cars that were from back in the days. Whether these guys restored, you know, a Jenkins car, a Grumpy Jenkins car, a Bob Glidden car, or, you know, I think there was a Lee Shepherd car. I mean, there was, you know, you were like, oh my God, yep, I remember watching that when I was in high school, you know, and these guys have restored them all back to what they were. It's kind of really cool.
Yeah, and that's what's interesting to me about. You've got the dichotomy of like a really expensive new race car, and then an old race car that's worth technically nothing, and now those cars that are technically worth nothing are going to start going up in value because everybody threw that part away. Everybody got rid of it because it was the old technology, and now it's like if you're looking to build like a 1988 Class 1, restore a Class 1, like
go over to Valley Performance, my buddy Butch Dean over there.
Yeah.
Dig through his piles because he's got it. Anybody that's looking for that stuff, he literally, oh yeah, I still have some of that, and he still has cars and trailers, you know, and but that is the case, you know, finding all that stuff, and even if you find it, it's like, okay, remachining it, remaking it, you know.
Well, and I would assume, I don't know this for a fact, but I would assume in the off-road throughout the past 25 years, there have been plenty of companies that have come and gone. Like, here's a new company that makes the hottest this, and this, and they were in business for 3 years, now they're out of business, and now that becomes like, oh, if you can find that one real rare vintage thing, they only made it from 88 to this, and all the Class 1 cars had it, or whatever the case is.
And that is it, you know, I mean, and it's, you know, it's still a small little group, but that is kind of the wave. How's
the off-road community as far as like, because we talk about on this podcast a lot how the VW community is real. They're real. If you're coming in on the street scene with like a new suspension, a new this, a new that, they're super critical about everything that you do. And they may not be as welcoming to new ideas. How is the off-road community to that, and also like new people getting into the scene? Like
new people getting into the scene, they welcome them. That's part of it. Like, we want the people. I mean, that's not even an issue. Change, that is definitely, you know, you have to sometimes change with the times. So what we ran in the 80s or 90s, you know, it's just not doing it anymore, or it's just failing or breaking or this. And so in the off-road side of it, we've done a lot of rule changes on the motor side of it. Now we have like pump gas motors. That's a version for certain classes that are become very popular because it's more cost effective. And some of the old time guys are not down with it, you know, but like the newer guys go, man, I can't afford to take my motor out every 2 races and send it to Wiks to have them redo it, you know, and so we, you know, they go, okay, well, we're gonna have a couple options for you guys, and I think it's definitely helped. There's classes that were kind of dwindling and going away that if they just quit changing the rules, leave them the way they are, they're gonna come back.
And that's kind of what pushes people out of it. It's typically. Everybody gets it. It's just like drag racing. Everybody gets into it because they got a car they think it's a little bit fast, and it hasn't cost them a lot of money so far.
Yeah.
And it all starts like that. And when you can, what starts all these things is like, if we can have a scene and that scene is competitive and anybody can get into it, you're going to see it explode.
Absolutely.
Because the barrier to entry is so low, people get into it, and then they get hooked with like, they love the thing, which is probably, I would assume, I don't know this for a fact, but I would assume side-by-side classes are pretty
monster.
Yeah.
I mean, that is the new up and coming thing. And I shouldn't even say up and coming. It's just
it's here.
It's here. It's growing. The guys that are, you know, building high end off-road parts for the buggies and trophy trucks have now looked at that and gone, okay, that's the new Volkswagen world, you know. And you know, I just talked to my friend Doug Fortin, who does transaxles and hubs, and he does Can-Am stuff. You can't build it fast enough.
Yeah.
He jumped on that about a year ago, and he's like, dude, it's just, when you go out to the races, there is just a ton of them.
And what's crazy, and just from my side, you know, that's my weapon of choice in the off-road world, because I drove a lot of street cars. I'm like, I don't want to drive a beam car in the dirt, because you know, to me it's like, when I get my Can-Am, I mean, I was blown away when I rode my Polaris Ranger 12 years ago. Like, man, look at this thing, just eats it up, you know. And then the technology difference, I remember, you know, we went up to our cabin and we're going through some trails, and I'm driving a Polaris 1000. Somebody's following me in my Polaris Ranger, and I'm like, bro, drive the 1000. I'll drive the Ranger because you're going too slow. And it wasn't they were going too slow. The wheelbase is too short. There's no travel and suspension, and you get so accustomed to the modern technology. I'm trying to keep up with the Polaris in this Ranger, thinking like they're just driving like a grandma. And I mean, the back wheels are coming off the ground. I mean, this thing has got no travel, no wheelbase, but the technology is so incredibly far. Like my Can-Am 1000.
They're amazing.
Oh my gosh, bro! I take that thing to Baja, and I'm like, 42 miles an hour is my number where I'm running across a whoop road, and I'm going across. There's a trail out of not out of San Felipe, but on the coming out of it might be Bay of LA. I'm not sure, but there's like 10 whoop road, like 10 miles of whoops, and these are 3 foot deep whoops.
Yeah. That goes right over the top.
Yeah, I'm just like skipping, and I'm like, this off road racing's no big deal. You know what I mean? But if you were in a Myers Manx doing that, you're gonna vomit. You're gonna vomit 4 minutes in, and you got another 2 hours to go because you could do it at 20.
No, you nailed it. The Polarises and the Can-Ams are just unbelievable.
Yeah,
especially for the price point, right?
Well, yeah. I mean, look, honestly, if you bought a bone stock one, and you were racing anything else that was home built, you know what I mean? There's no competition.
Yeah.
Because the technology and design that's in these new things, but it makes people. I mean, I remember the first hour I'm out there on my trip. We're going on the Baja when I'm leaving San Felipe, and I'm flying down the Power Line Road. You know the Power Line Road in San Felipe that's
Zoo Road.
Yeah, what's it called?
Zoo Road.
Zoo Road. Yeah, non-racer, racer. Right, that's the difference. But I'm hauling down there, because it's like what's so crazy is like all these trails that just split off and cross over, and it's like pick a line, okay, whatever. But you're when you're moving that fast, and that's where a lot of these things, because you see these new things getting wadded up on the daily because there's so much power.
Wow, they just go way too fast for what they are, and
they don't have the driving skill.
They don't have the skill. I mean, off-roading in off-road racing. I tell everybody, it's the only racing organization that basically, if your checkbook's big enough and you can write the check, you could go race the elite class of trophy truck tomorrow.
Yep.
You can't do that in NHRA. You can't do that in NASCAR, IndyCar, no other sport.
Yeah.
But in off-road, oh man, you got the money?
You want to know the big dogs?
Come on over, and it's just like that. I've said forever, they need to have some type of licensing process to where, hey, you got to run in these lower classes for at least X amount of races, because you're seeing it with the Polaris side-by-sides. You go spend, let's just say $20,000 on a side-by-side, and these cars go way too fast. And really...
Way too fast, because driving in the dirt is a completely different technique.
Yeah.
A lot of people just think like, I rode with a guy at the sand dunes, and I thought to myself, the only reason this guy's not dead is because he's got unbelievable suspension, because this guy drives like an absolute buffoon. And the suspension can only save you so much until you're fighting physics.
Oh, absolutely.
And when you're trying to go left, and you don't understand the roll of the car or how the tires work, because there's like a whole groove to it, right?
Sure.
Like, and that's if you're driving a beam car versus a full travel car versus like a mid-engine car or rear. Like they all have these little different characteristics, and some people, what the trick is, they get in these little side-by-sides and they just think, I mean, these things are engineered really, really well, but you can't engineer stupid out of anything.
No, you can't.
And they'll fool you. You'll really think like it's you. You're like, oh, it's all me, bro. It's all me. Like I'm a driving machine, and like put that same guy in a class 5. Yeah, you know what I mean. And it's
upside down in a quarter mile.
But it's the same thing with drag racing or any of these kind of stuff, which was surprising to me that your first time on the drag trip was in a pro stock car.
Yeah.
But I mean, there's so much to be had, and it all of it starts with the Volkswagen.
Yeah,
you know what I mean?
Crazy.
Because we're talking to your wife Becky,
yeah.
Becky Freeman, not Becky Wik, but Freeman has been known for racing, and I think her brother runs.
Her brother helps run Snore. Her mom and dad were one of the original people that started Snore. Back in the day, so she's been involved in it forever.
Yeah, and like she's a known racer. She can hold her own racing. I mean, it's a different, and it's funny because you invited me out to the races with you one time, and I was like, I've never been to an off-road race. Like, really check it out. And like, it's funny because she's all business.
Pretty much. People, and she's gotten much better, because she's gotten older. Now that we have a daughter, she's calmed down. But back in the day, it was all business. It was like when you showed up at the races, it was on. There was no messing around, straight serious. We put the time in, and it paid off. We won a lot of races.
Yeah, and now, I think, in your opinion, is off-road racing kind of on a little bit of a rise right now? Like more people are getting into it? Has it kind of plateaued? Or are you seeing generational things happen?
Generational things for sure. We're on our second generation with a lot of guys just in, doing customer stuff. It has its spurts. And, when economy's good, usually off-road's good. The guys that build houses and move dirt and do this,
huge percentage of contractors.
Yeah,
do that,
the contractors are kind of like the off-road guys, and so this year with the whole COVID thing, it's believe it or not, the races have still been pretty good because everybody wanted to get out and go race, and so when they could, they would. So.
Now you just had a race canceled last week, right?
We did. It was crazy.
And they canceled it like last minute?
Last minute. So they literally had all the qualifying on Friday. It was all done.
What race was this?
This was what they called Battle at Pram, but it was out at State Line. Snore is the organization, and they put on it's a little 12-mile loop that's on a all private land, which Prim owns, and basically I don't know the exact gist of it, but they went in and like 4:00 in the afternoon, the day before the race, all the qualifying was done, everything. They said, "Oh yeah, you guys can't do this," and so the Snore organization said, "Well, we'll pay the penalties, whatever it is. Just go ahead and send us the bill." And they said, "No, you don't get it. No, we're canceling this." And just send us.
So the Snore people were like, "We're doing this."
Well, they're kind of like, "We're doing this," And they said, "Oh, you think so?" And so they said, "Yeah." So they went ahead and went into the hotel and said, "Hey, if you guys let this happen on your land, we're going to pull your gaming permit."
Get out of here.
And so they called the Snore
officials. Like,
officials.
yeah, your race is over.
Yeah, they said, "You guys got to vacate the premises." And the worst part was there was another race going on in Barstow, 100 miles away, right in California. And it's just like, are you kidding me?
And usually it's the other way around. Usually it's California that's got the real stringent stuff.
And I look at it now, I kind of laugh because, okay, so now I'm not at the races, so I go down to Home Depot and I go here and I go there and Target and wherever else, and there's just massive people everywhere, right? And you're going, here we want to just go race out in the desert. Outside.
Breathe in dirt.
Yeah, breathe. And no, you guys can't do that. So it's just so bogus.
Yeah, it's a bummer, man, because, I mean, when you look at, like, when the off-road community rolls into San Felipe, that's a lot of money.
A lot of money.
You know what I mean? And it's good for the economy. It's good for a lot of things, and it continues to keep blossoming other things. And when you start stifling things like that, I mean, it seems kind of ridiculous because so many people plan and prepare and get ready for this race, and it's a social thing, it's a community, and they keep poking the bear, man. I think the people are going to fight back. If they...
I hope so. Because I mean, I look at it and go, I think about the money that the hotel lost because there was probably 250 entries, and that's cars, and then you have all the people that come with them. And so when you look at the income that one little weekend, Friday night, Saturday night, and probably Sunday.
And they needed it. They
need it, right? I mean, from all the restaurants in there, from the gambling, the bars, everything else. And you look at it and go, wow, that just costs, that hotel a lot, And so it's just not right.
No, it's definitely something that we hope to see change. I mean, this last year, even for the show scene, was just horrible. There was nothing going on as far as car shows, other than just like literally a handful of things, but all the big events didn't take place. And, hopefully that'll all change coming this year. And, I mean, the hobby, everything that we do, the hobby, the racing, everything is relying on people's extracurricular activities, their hobbies. You know what I mean? No one needs to go off-road racing. No one needs to own an old Volkswagen.
No.
But it's the passion of what we do and why we do it. And hopefully we won't get held back too much longer because, I mean, and that's the dumbest thing. It's like with car shows, like you're outside.
Yeah.
Like you go in like you said, you go in a Home Depot and there's
Massive
250 cars in the parking lot, and there's 500 people in the store, because the average are 2 people per car going to the store.
Yeah.
And it's like, well, what's the difference? But I don't know. It's a big drag, but I'm looking forward to 2021, that it'll be a good year. And, you know, we got hours of stuff to talk about, because I got all kinds of crap to talk about. But one of the things I wanted to kind of bring around is with the off-road scene changing and all that stuff going on, you then had to get into V8s.
Yeah, that was a natural progression.
Now, did you always build V8s, or did you learn building race cars?
We learned building race cars. Read lots of magazines. This is, you think about it now. It's all. I mean, I hired kids, and they go, "Oh, how did you learn that?" "Oh, YouTube." I didn't learn that way.
Right.
Everybody goes, "Well, who'd you work for?" I never worked for anybody. I just did it.
That's kind of an anomaly too, because a lot of guys, a lot of builders I talk to, a lot of people like that worked for Joe Schmo engine building, and then whatever or whoever, and then.
Nope, just did it, buddy. Just learned the school of hard knocks. It's just to me, it's just an engine, right? I don't care if it's 4-cylinder, 6-cylinder, inline, V. So we kind of just progressed as the sport progressed, and got into the V8 world. We did, like I said, Oddfire V6s. We did some Toyota Camry V6s, Toyota 4AGs, Honda B series. What was
the worst motor they tried to introduce into off-road racing that didn't last long and they're done with it?
The Camry V6 was a dual overhead cam. We didn't do many of them. Fat kind of did a bunch of them, and I did I'd say a handful of them. I'm like, okay, yeah, we're not doing those.
Just way too much work and not enough.
Just power. A lot of work, not a lot of power, a lot of RPM, which is not good for off-road, And so when they went down that road, we went down the LS road. We jumped into the LS market and started with your LS1s, LS6s, and
because I think the evolution went VW, then Toyota, the R22. Was that the big thing?
Yeah, some of that. The VW Type 4. It was Type 1, then it was Type 4. Then it was kind of like
a little bit of 911.
911 was very popular, because
this is pre-Truggies.
Oh yeah, Herps, everybody, all the big namers had 911s.
I wonder where all those engines are today.
They're still around, I'm sure.
Butch Dean's place.
Oh yeah, Butch has got a bunch. Then it went, Oddfire V6, some V4s. The guys that had.
What's an Oddfire V6 out of?
Well, that would be like your original.
Not like a 231 Buick.
It would be original Busch Grand National. If you're going to the NASCAR world back in the 90s, you had the V8 cars and you had the V6 cars.
Right.
So those motors are a hand-built Chevy block race motor. So, and basically those trickled down into the off-road world. So they didn't come in any car.
And they didn't have to, they probably were not even close to cheap.
Oh, no, they're all aluminum. It's an all-aluminum V8. It's an expensive motor, but those basically were there for a while, and then those basically the LS took over, so your LS, your small block Chevy, and those kind of took over, and within the last I'd tell you 3 years, 4 years, 3 years, I'd tell you big blocks are kind of making a comeback.
Really?
Yeah, big blocks. Some of the guys in the very early days of trophy truck ran big blocks. But then they all kind of got away from them, went back to small blocks. And, the small blocks, basically we, pumped those motors up to 470 cubic inches, right? And so now...
These are regular 350s.
These are 350s originally, but now they're all aftermarket aluminum stuff. Even with the LS was, LS1 was pretty small cubic inch motor, and now, our basic LS starts at about 430 cubic inches and goes up to 460. So, for an LS small block, basically based engine. So,
and the process with LS, I mean, they're the condition of aftermarket parts and stuff that you get quality wise compared to VW.
You can't even compare it. I hate to say it. The LS world.
Like you're not like, hey, put this in the drawer of bearings that are like a 3,000th off.
No, you're not. Plus you could buy bearings. oh, you need a +1 or a -1, you can get them. You can't do that in the VW world, right? You're sending cranks back to Castillo or Berg and having them take a thou off to get the right clearance. Like in the V8 world, that's just not how it is. Whether it's Ford, Chevy, we could buy bearings like that, and it's just because of the quantity, right?
Sure.
There's just so many more of them. So the LS world is that motor. Just they did a great job developing that. They took everything they learned from
NASCAR and all that stuff.
NASCAR, drag racing, and kind of molded into that motor, and it's been a great motor for the off-road world.
Yeah, it seems to be when you're at the sand dunes, it's all over.
There you go.
And I got one question about the off-road. Why did the Subi never take off, the Subaru motor? Because to me, it seems like...
So it's funny you say, you brought up Fox and some of these guys. John Marking, which is the guy that kind of ran Fox, was one of the main guys. I think he tried to do the Subi stuff for quite a few times. Always had oily issues. Always had bottom.
Oh, really?
Oh, yeah. And they never really got it sorted out. And I know out back, I think it's out back. Now it's called out front.
Yeah.
Now it's out front.
John.
It used to be out back. But they've got it sorted out. But we just, in the off-road world, for what we do, they never would last. Everybody
Really?
blew them up.
It'd all be bottom end failures because of no oil.
A lot of bottom end failures. So at the time, I don't know, maybe they weren't dry sumping them. Maybe they were trying to run them wet sump. They were, there definitely was something going on.
The only other thing that I see that could be seriously an issue with the Subi setup is the timing belt.
Usually the belts are pretty good. I got to be honest, the quality of the belts nowadays are pretty
Well,
good.
and the only reason I say that is because my sand cart left in gear in the trailer and it rocking back and forth.
Rip the belt.
It didn't rip the belt. It just bumped a gear.
Oh, God.
Yeah.
Well.
And I get to the sand dunes. I get the Glamis. I unload my car. I'm like, let's do this. Let it rip, tater chip. And I just fired up. It's like pop, 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 pop. It's like popping out of the. I'm like, oh no.
Well, what happens is on the new modern motors, the timing tensioners are oil pressure driven, some of them are. So old school, it's all spring driven, right? Or it has a solid tensioner that you tension by hand and you got to twist the belt a certain amount and okay, that's how it's supposed to be, Well, the new stuff is sometimes oil pressure based. So if the motor doesn't have oil pressure, it really doesn't have a lot of tension on the belt, right? So I could see that happening. That's
and luckily my buddy that I was there was like childhood friends with John at Outfront, so makes a phone call and he's like, all right, you got a 12-pack, like a 12-pack case. He says, tear the cardboard, slide it in the gears, in the main gear, and then once you get it between the tooth and the belt, then you just manually slide it back to where it's supposed to be, and then pull the piece of cardboard out, and you go like it was it was a crazy thing. I had to take the belt covers off,
yeah.
But I was able to just barely slip it back together, and it was it was crazy. But you look at these things and that horizontally opposed Subi motors, like the technological evolution that Volkswagen never got to, and my understanding is that Subaru bought that technology from Volkswagen. It's my understanding, but I don't. That's here or there been verified, but I'm surprised. I thought that would be the next thing, but then the next hot ticket after, once you started before you got into the LS thing was like the Ecotech or the Eco.
No, Ecotechs have evolved here, and
that's just a different class.
That's a different class.
4-cylinder.
Basically, that used to be that is class 10, and we used to build Hondas and Toyotas, like a Toyota 4AG, or we built the Honda B series motors, a B16 or a B18, and we were building those with all the fuel injection and Motec and dry sumped, and it was a $25,000 4-cylinder motor that spun 9,000 RPM, and you rebuilt them every couple races, and they weren't cheap, and basically it killed the class. Is what happened because
too expensive.
Everybody's
like, if I'm spending trophy truck money and running a class 10.
What happened was the LS came out, and the LS was so inexpensive in the very beginning that why spend $25,000 on a 4-cylinder in an unlimited buggy, but you have a limited motor? Let's just go class 1 and we'll put an LS in there and it's cheaper. And so that's what a lot of guys did, and it killed class 10. So class 10 is basically limited motor, unlimited suspension. And so they said, well, what do we got to do? And so some guys came up with this 2.4 Ecotech that basically crate motor made about the same power as the Honda. It made a bunch of torque. It didn't rev. You know, it only runs maybe 7,000 RPM where the Honda run 9. And so they started kind of putting that into the class, and that brought that class back and made Class 10 what it is today. And it's really a good class. You know, we do a lot of the Ecotech crate motors. So basically they're an untouched crate motor, all stock parts, but we can put any aftermarket headers, flywheels, clutches, bracketry. We do all electronics, you know, mil-spec harnesses with Motec ECUs or Life Racing, or just all depends on what the guy wants to do. And you know, the motor lasts the guys run them for a season at least, if maybe 2 seasons, and then you basically get a new long block and put all your accessories on it.
Yeah, you were telling me that you don't rebuild those.
Can't. They won't allow you, because at a certain point, if you let us rebuild them, we're going to tweak them. We're going to
start cheating.
Well, I'm not going to say cheat.
I saw when I won't mention the name of the old off-road racer that I was at his shop, and I saw a whole pair of single port 40 by 35.5 heads.
There you
and
go.
I said,
there you go.
What are those, man? He's like, those are cheater heads, bud.
Yeah, that's it. You know, so it's just finding that edge, right? And I look at it and go, you're better off going nope, because they don't make an oversized piston stock. So you'd have to go to an aftermarket company,
right?
You know,
and what's that motor cost out of the box, like a long block?
So you can buy now you can buy them from Chevy, and they're about $5,300, but they want a $1,200 core charge.
Wow.
Yeah. So we have sourced all the parts now, and we hand build them, which we're allowed to. We're a certified guy. We tag them with our tags, and we hand build them with all brand new GM parts. And you know, we'll go through and just blueprint them. You know, I mean, it's all 100% legal, but we go through and bore gauge and check and make sure it's right. And you know, we do quite a few of those. Matter of fact, I probably sold 4 in the last week and a half.
Wow.
So it's a very popular motor.
Yeah, that's crazy.
Yeah.
Man. Well, I tell you, man, I you know, I've enjoyed having you on here. I definitely want to have you back, man, because I could talk for hours with you about all kinds of nonsense, but you know, I wanted to get you on the air, and we have this conversation, talk a lot about your history, talk a lot about the drag racing, and now just one thing to bring it back to VWs. You tried to get your old car back.
Yeah,
am I a mistake on that?
We've been working on it.
Have you been in touch with the guy that you sold it to?
So I haven't, but my good buddy George Jimenez, who bought my shop down in Cali, he is still in touch with them. We have located it. It's down in Monterrey, Mexico. It has changed hands a couple times, we think now, but we're trying to get a hold of it. So maybe we can get that thing back up here to the States and resurrect that thing and put it all together. And
yeah, I wonder if there ever will be like a vintage drag racing class for Volkswagens. I mean, you look at the nostalgia drags they have in Bakersfield, and I'm sure they do the same thing with Volkswagens.
I don't think so, because the Volkswagens are already vintage as they are, right? You
right.
go build a 67. So, I mean, I look at it and go, it would be, if I got that car back, it would be hard not to go and do a bunch of updates and try and make it like a modern day pro stock that they, you know, these guys, Pat Downs and all these guys have nowadays, you know.
What's the difference in technology between that car and your car?
Motor technology definitely changed.
As far as chassis-wise?
Chassis-wise, they've done some longer ladder bars. They've done a low center of gravity car. They sit a little bit lower.
But
so that could be all.
But nothing like game-changing ones like, that car's garbage.
No, I think I could take that car. I think I could take my old car. I'd have to remount some stuff, get the thing down a little bit lower, and it had strut front end, and it probably needs a little bit longer ladder bar in it. And then the big thing is motor and tranny, right? They're all putting bus trannies in them, or
right.
CVs and doing that. The transmissions have, you know, kind of almost become clutchless, clutch management stuff. However, they're doing whether it's
the Rev 6 or whatever.
The Rev 6, and these guys, you know, back in the day, Berg had what's called an anti-shocker.
The Washington anti-shocker.
Yeah, and now guys have done some more sophisticated versions of those.
It's crazy, like a little tiny thing that your clutch pedal hit, but it's just like that little.
Yeah, that little just didn't, you know, shock it.
Now, did you know Gene? I mean, did you?
Oh yeah.
So
yeah.
What was Gene's personality like you're, because I'm assuming at the time, Gene's all business, trying to run a shop, and here's this scrub kid that just rolls in there and makes buddies with his boys. And probably a lot of people were doing that back in those days, trying to be...
He was, honestly, you never went in there where he didn't have a smile, didn't have something to say. You know, I mean, you could tell he loved what he was doing.
Really?
At least on my end of it, on that side of the counter that I was on. And he loved it. And whether it was at the track, he was stoked to be there every day. And what are you building? What do you got going? Blah, blah, blah. I mean, nothing but, like, we used to call it the Berg Bible. Like, he all the pamphlets he wrote. And I still have it to this day in a 3-ring binder that we had. And, there was just so much knowledge there that as a young kid, you couldn't find it anywhere else. So of course you read it all. You read it and you lived by it to a certain point.
Yeah.
But at a certain point you go, well, 7-1, I'm not driving to New York, I could make mine 9, but I was fortunate enough that he took a liking to me. And so I feel like my first roller cam motor, which he did for me. Like, we took him a case. They did what they did in their own race motors, because Gary got to be, Gary was a guy that we looked up to, and it was like, okay, what's it going to take, dude? Can you do a roller cam? Well, bring me a case. Let me see, And we'd order cranks from him. And so if I'd order a crank, Gene was a big Porsche Journal guy. Porsche Journal. I was like, no, I want Chevy Journal. Okay, we'll do Chevy Journal for you. And it would be like, well, hey, can you do all the lightning stuff on it like you do? I've seen some cranks, and okay. And so you'd have to wait, but all of a sudden you'd get a crank and it was 4 or 5 pounds lighter, and Chevy Journal, and it was like, oh, okay,
Well, what's funny is, I have that Berg motor in the garage,
Sure.
the infamous Berg motor that I found.
Yeah.
And I remember I called Clyde's shop, and I don't know these guys very well. I mean,
Sure.
I've talked to Clyde a few times, but I'm sure he probably would never recognize me or whatever. Not important, but I called him one time and I said, hey, I've got the receipts. When I bought that motor, I had all the receipts from 1988. And I'm going through it, and I said, yeah, I think you guys built this motor. And he says, no, we didn't build motors for people.
No.
We just sold parts.
Yeah.
He says,
very rare.
Unless you were like a friend of Gene's.
Yes.
He says, you read in the manual, he says the best person should build your motor is you.
Yeah.
Because
he wanted to educate people, right?
Yeah.
And then he wanted people to learn, and he did. Very few people had true Berg motors. Very few.
Yeah.
And he'd want you to learn, and he knew that if you read and did it yourself, then you're hands on, and it's gonna be that much better off. So, and he was a great guy.
Yeah, no, definitely. I mean, listen, and on this podcast, I know I've been wanting to get Gary on here for a long time.
Oh man.
And you better call him and twist his arm, because I could talk to him for an hour just about trying to figure out what life was like back then, what it was like, because it's one of those things where on the VW side that there's Gene Berg bought a set of DCNFs from me at Pomona one time, and he came walking through. Here's this guy with his pants pulled up too high.
Yeah.
His plaid shirt and his fisherman hat on, just kind of
it.
walking through. And then he's like, how much do you want for the DCNFs? And he's like, okay, I sold them for $100, whatever. And then realize, bro, that's Gene Berg. I just sold a set of DCNFs to Gene Berg. My bro, so rad. And I was on this high, and it's he's just a dude, just a regular guy.
Yeah.
But because of what he contributed to the scene, the family as a whole, I think, those heads that I have over there, they're stamped on the inside, ported by Clyde Berg, and the you look at the ports and there's a glass. You know what I mean? It's just super nice port work. The motor runs like a top. It's super low compression. It's got DC nuts on. It's 6:6 to 1 compression.
That's how he did it.
I mean, it's just crazy. But they contributed so much to the scene that I really want to. I'd love to dig deep and just see what it was like being around at that time, and so maybe some of the behind the scenes stuff.
Sure.
Because there's so much history there, and they contributed. So I think they were one of the first ones making the inch and 7/8 headers.
Oh yeah.
You know what I mean?
Oh, all that stuff. They developed a lot of that big stuff.
Yeah.
And back in the day, in the drag race side of it, Gary had 84 by 94, or actually 94 by 94 motors. He had monsters. He was the guy that was doing. We would take.
And they would make their own cranks. That 94 crank, they'd make it themselves.
They made all their stuff
because they had all the billet stocks.
They had it all. They all their forgings, and he took. I think they were 95 millimeter Porsche cylinders, which is a Nicosil cylinder, aluminum based, and he would splice 2 together to make them long enough to be able to put a big stroke in them. That's what was in some of their race stuff. It was unbelievable, you know. And I was fortunate enough that I did get to see some of that stuff, not all of it, but it was like, okay, you know. And
were they super secretive around the shop with their race stuff, or no?
Well, you didn't. I mean, you were behind the counter forever, you know. I mean, and then finally, if you got to, you know, Gary at one time, I was having problems with the wedge mate, and I showed up down there, and he's like, come by after work, and I'll help you, you know. And so I went down there, and I got to go in the back. You know,
that's a big deal.
When you got to go in the back, it was like, holy cow, this is where it's at, you know. And Gary had his little area where he built motors, and you know, it'd be like there'd be a packing blanket underneath there that was a motor, and here's another one over here, and then you know where they ported heads. I'll never forget. Clyde had, it was like this fishnet that went over the top that Gene, I don't know who figured it out, because when you're porting heads, it's dirty and there's stuff everywhere, and it was like it would drop down and make him like this little cocoon that was probably a little bit bigger than, you know, maybe 10 by 15 area, to where it didn't get all over the shop. And I was like, man, that's a great idea, you know.
Oh, because it would, like,
all the shavings
floating off in the air.
Yeah, and it was like, man, and so, I mean, they had everything to do everything back there, you know, and it was just...
And it's crazy because it wasn't like... It wasn't like common knowledge technology, like the fishnet thing. Like, he probably saw that somewhere else in some other industry, and said, "This works for these shavings."
It was like kind of crazy, you know. I was like, "That's a great idea how he did that," you know. And so,
but like the Washington anti-shocker, like, who would think of that?
Yeah.
Like the little spring that just slows down the clutch at the very last second. Because I don't know if he had a background in engineering. I don't know, but I mean, the guy was just like, you know,
ahead of his game, dude.
Super into it. And one of the stories that I hear all the time is that when he actually came down, because I had Joe Horvath on the podcast, and Joe Horvath, 86 years old, been in the game for a long time, Rev Master engines, like he was Rev Master.
Yeah. And
I think he was the one that was telling me that Gene had actually come down, was supposed to be starting a shop with Dean... the dinosaur. I can't think of his name. Dean Lowry. Like, him and Dean Lowry were supposed to start a shop together, and they came down here, and it was like, that's not going to work. Just going to start his own shop. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah, because I think he was originally from Washington, right?
Came down from Washington.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, so you were teenagers hanging out with all them guys at the time.
Oh yeah, at that time, you know.
I mean, Gary was the old one, right? Because he's like, he's like 5-6 years older than you.
I think he's older than that.
Yeah, I think he's like 60.
Yeah,
maybe.
So he's 9 years older than me. So when I'm 18, he's 20.
Oh yeah, you're like, dude, that's a man. You're like a
straight up, you know. I mean, I'm just getting out of high school, going down there and spending my, you know, allowance.
And then you got Clyde,
Doug and Clyde.
Yeah, Doug and Clyde, and they're like, you know, there's like this whole.
It's
like that's the spot. Like, and it's funny because I think he was so specific about what he was going to do. People either liked him or didn't like 100%.
him. 100%.
That was it.
You know, forever it was like, oh, you can't run 94s. It's 90.5s. And it's thick wall 90.5s, you know, and it was like, you can't run 94s. Well, at a certain point, the stuff that he built, that you could get in and drive from here to New York and not even think about it, you're right. You probably shouldn't run 94s because the cooling and this and that, you know.
But we were talking quarter mile at a time.
Yeah, you know.
If you get 3,000 miles of it, it's a lot of drive. It's a lot of passes.
So, I mean, and you know, all their race motors had big pistons in them, but like for the street scene, you know, I mean, he built some unbelievable 2110s and stuff like that with their packages, and he just had it sorted out, you know. I mean, they just drove so good, whether it was DCNFs or, you know, whatever. I mean, it was just like they were performance engines that lasted because of the quality of the stuff.
Yeah, it's crazy. It's like, although the scene seems so small, there's so many different caveats and so many different parts manufacturers and people that came out of nowhere, and every little thing that it's like, you know, nothing ever and I want to say it was driven by the VW people being like, it was driven by the dollar. Like, oh, I want it cheaper, and this guy can make it cheaper. And so this company springs out of nowhere from, you know, from Gex to Bernie Bergman to whoever, you know, and you had everybody. So yeah, it's been a you know, it's been a crazy ride for me being in the scene for the last 25 years, just as an enthusiast and seeing the developments and evolutions of all these things. And that's, you know, why I do what I do, what I do with this, because I love doing it. And I eventually, want to start doing a little bit of off-road stuff every now and again, just some off-road stuff, because all things started with Volkswagens.
Pretty much. That's
so
where they all, had VWs at one time or another.
That's it. So, is there anybody you want to thank before we wrap up the podcast? Anybody that's been influential in you being where you're at, getting where you're at, or some of the people that really.
I'm going to tell you, my parents are super supportive always. Back in the day, Mr. Roger Crawford helped me out a lot. Gary Berg, Gene, just had a lot of great friends that put a lot of time in and helped me, and we, had a great time doing it and still doing it, So, today's time, I've had Kiyoki Disa has worked for me for 17 years. He came from Hawaii, big VW guy, he's been at the shop with me here in Vegas, and so I couldn't do it without him. And
good engine builder for sure.
Oh, he's meticulous, So, my wife for putting up with all this crap, but
it's her fault, man.
Yeah, she's
right. They supplied they paved the road for your poison, right? Like her family probably bought a bunch of motors from you.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Oh, they did. At one time, I think we had, between the nieces and nephews and her brother and her dad, I think we did 6 or 7 motors just in her family.
Wow.
Because we had, there's a pretty big family that was all into 1 through 1600 off-road racing. So, it's there's just been tons of people and tons of neat people that you've met through the years, and I just saw the other day that Chris Klingerman passed away, and I think about that and I go, man, I remember sitting in the stands and watching him and Mike Smith and these guys, and it was just like, wow, it's just sad,
We're all getting older, man.
Dude, it's crazy, and so, those are guys you looked up to and that you couldn't get close enough to the car because you just want to see what they were doing, and it was just, oh my gosh, so, it's interesting when you sit back and look at the last, 30 years. Probably.
It's been a lot. It's been a lot of stuff, and it's like the thing that got you into it, the enjoyment that you love to do racing. When's the last time you ran a car down the track?
Drag strip?
Yeah.
It's been a long time.
Yeah.
And I drove Angie Vanderhorst's Super Street car here in Vegas. God, it's been, I'd have to go look at that. I think if there's a picture on the wall at the shop, I'd have to look, but it's
back in the Buggin days, like when we were doing the Buggins here?
Yeah, when they did the Buggins here.
So you drove her car?
I drove her car. I don't know, for some reason she couldn't make it.
You were like testing it?
We were testing it. Well, she couldn't make it, so they let me, her dad was like, well, we want to race the car, and I used to help them and go to the races with them when she was driving it.
And I met him in your pit, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, Bruce comes to the off-road races. So Bruce is a good friend, and he progressed from drag racing. I went drag racing with him to he started doing all the off-road stuff with us, and he's got side-by-sides and 4-seaters, and he loves it, But she wasn't going to make it, and Bruce was like, come drive the car. And I was like, okay.
How nervous are you driving somebody else's car?
That's a whole story in itself. We probably don't have time for that, but I can tell you this. Almost crashed that one.
Hold on. We got time, brother.
Okay.
Well, the story's good. People love listening to it. Yeah.
So he asked me to come drive his car. It has a brand new Dick Vale paint job. So those of you guys that know the car, this thing is immaculate.
It was a cover car, Hot VWs.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Cover car.
He showed me, he's like, I was on the cover of Hot VWs. I was like, oh, I should probably get on the podcast.
Yeah. An unbelievable car. So at the time, I was a line lock guy in all my racing stuff. I never used a stage brake. A lot of these guys use a stage brake and hold the brake and then reach over and grab the shifter and grab second gear. And I was always a line lock guy. So you have line lock, whether you had it on the front tires is normally how you do it, but most Volkswagens don't have front brakes. So what we would do is put it on the rear tires, and you just have to be very cautious on how much pressure you put on it. And basically it locks the brakes up. When you put the first stage light on, it puts a little drag on it to where you can kind of drag the car into the next light, and the car won't just keep rolling. So at the time, they put a new line lock on it, and I never paid attention to it, and they went up, and I go up, and first time driving this car, I go through all the stuff. Well, the line lock was somehow activated on a switch, or he had to switch something on the back of the car when I pulled up the stage. So he does this switch. Well, what it did was it turned the line lock on, so it basically closed the brake line off. So when I went up to go stage, it really kind of had no brakes, but a little, and I couldn't really tell. I was like, well, there's a little drag. That's because the brakes were a little bit on. And so I launched the car, go through the gears, shut the thing off, and I go to hit the brakes, and the brake pedal is rock hard. And I'm like, oh my God, there's no
You're headed for the wall.
I'm headed for the sand trap.
At how fast? At 140?
No, I think it only went 125 or something. And at this point, the motors
you drove with the brakes on?
Well, the brake was dragging, right? So, and I was like, oh my God. So my only option was start downshifting this thing. Well, the motor shut off. So I literally, it's a dog ring transmission, and I literally stuffed the thing into third gear and let the clutch out, and it just
Hold on, so you're engine braking the car with the engine off.
With the engine off, straight up. And I'm like, oh my God. And like, thank God Vegas is uphill and long. And so as it's getting slowed up, I'm thinking, I think I can make it. I think, when I went around the corner at the top end, it literally was like going around the corner. And like, dude, the guys in the safety truck were looking at me like, oh my gosh. And I got out of the car and I was shaking. I was like, oh my God, I about crashed this brand new paint job car, because the paint job was probably $10,000, and I was just like, and he pulls up, he's like, oh man, how'd it go? And I go, not good. We have big problems. He's like, what? Well, we finally figured out it's something in how the electrical worked. It was turning the line lock on. And
locking the brake pedal.
That's
nice.
Well, if you didn't have your foot on the brake, right? If I would have had my foot on the brake, it'd have locked it and the car wouldn't have moved, And so we had to go rewire stuff in the pits. And then I think we went on to win the next day, to be honest.
Holy crap.
Yeah, so that's the last time I've been down the drag strip.
And what was that car running motor-wise?
That car had a 8496.
Naturally aspirated?
Naturally aspirated.
You're not a turbo guy.
No.
What did you tell me about turbo? What did you tell me about turbos? What did you say? Yeah. What did you say about turbo guys?
I mean,
there's a saying that carb guys say about turbo guys. Something about like if you can't make power, put a turbo on it or something. Is that what you, I mean? I
shouldn't say that because there's guys that unbelievable turbo stuff.
And it's kind of in jest, but the reality is the reality is there's a little more tolerance with a turbo car. You can push your way through some setbacks.
Well, I mean, of course, the better motor that you have that you put a turbo on is going to make more power. But, naturally aspirated, it's the hardest way to make power. Right?
Yeah, because it's got to be exactly tuned.
Well, and it's got to, the cylinder head and all that's got to be right. So, I just have never been a turbo guy. And
you ever driven a turbo car down the track?
Nope, no. Driven some turbo stuff.
Because you know what happens when you drive that kind of power.
No,
you get addicted.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Yeah,
Kyoki's a turbo guy, right? And he was a turbo guy, and he's like, dude, it just never quits pulling, Yeah. And I've driven some street stuff with turbos and stuff, and it's amazing, know. But I've just always been an NA guy forever, I just think it's, that's how it is. But.
See, I think keeping the perfect combination is like the 2600 Type 4 with a low PSI turbo setup on it, like maybe 5 to 7 max.
That's probably it, because the problem is it wants to lift the head.
I know, but that's what I'm saying. That's what I'm saying. Like, if you imagine what kind of torque you're going to push out on the street, if you got a turbo Type 4, and you're not drag racing the car, but you're like street race killing people. Yeah. You know what I mean? Like you just mob down the road and just downshift and just and there's no way they're catching you because between the torque and then a little bit of boost.
Yeah.
Because I've been thinking maybe could I sneak some squeeze on that car? Is that too much?
That's the problem.
I'm just curious. I'm asking for a friend.
Yeah. You can do whatever you want.
Well, but listen, I'm still a VW guy, so I want to know, can I daily drive it? Can I get 400 horsepower for $2,000 and daily drive
with a little nitrous and drive it to the show in California? By the way, yeah, right.
Can I make it up Baker Grid with nitrous?
Yeah, exactly.
Well, cool, man. Well, I appreciate you coming on the podcast, man. It's been a great time, and I know you had a good time because I love chatting it up with you.
It's good. I'll have to be back.
Well, I will for sure get you back because I definitely want to get into some of the deeper stuff. And some of you guys out there listening, if there's things I didn't touch on with Adam, he's here in town. And as long as it took me, I've been asked this guy for over a year to come on the podcast, only because he has such great stories and we haven't even scratched the surface of all the fun stuff. But for sure, we're going to have you back on. And if you guys are out there listening, there's things I didn't ask him about and you want me to get some insight, we can do that. And I know that we talked about it one time. We're talking about trying to do a dyno day over at your place.
Yeah.
And if we can get this Dyno Day nailed off, I'm gonna live stream the Dyno Day. We're just gonna just talk what you want to talk and bring it in Vegas and put it down at the dyno.
We'll have to try and schedule that.
We're gonna see who has the most torque and horsepower in a VW bus that they drive.
Oh, bus.
So, well, buses, Gias, whatever. But you know,
Okay.
I'm always trying to slant the class to wherever I could possibly win. So just being honest, but
I get it.
but yeah, I appreciate you coming on, man, and we'll for sure do this again.
Appreciate you. Thanks for having me.
All right, brother. Later. Yeah, that's good stuff, bro.
You think so?
Oh yeah, bro. It's just good people.